Hello, everyone, and welcome to the LFC Roundtable podcast, only without the LFC today. I am your host, Taran Armstrong, and today I am joined by the beta team, I think we're calling them. First is Lita. How you doing, Lita?
I'm so good. This is amazing. I feel like a real honorary So You Think You Can podcast loser. It's like I somehow lost this competition without ever participating, which is a real honor for me.
It's a pretty unique skill to be able to infiltrate a competition that you never actually lost, but still pretend that you lost.
Yeah.
Speaking of, So You Think You Can podcast losers. Next up, we have Liana Boraas. How you doing, Liana?
Oh, I'm great. I love being called a loser. It's almost as insulting as being called a meatball, but I'll take it.
Yes. And then finally, we have Jon Krause, a member of Team Robot. How you doing, John?
I'm doing good. You know, Matthew Broderick once told me that the only way to win is not to play. So perhaps that's the secret, Lita.
True. Good advice.
There you go. Yes, every single one of the LFC was unable to make it tonight. They're all doing their own business elsewhere. So I brought in a new team, fresh perspective. Very excited to have these guys on. This is the podcast where we break down everything that's happening on the feeds. And we are live every Monday night at 8 p.m. Eastern to talk about it all. We have the chat room open on robhasawebsite.com, and you can send questions into me at Armstrong Taran on Twitter. So let's get right into this. Let's start off recapping the week. We have Jessica as our HOH. Cody came back in. She's got the halting hex. She's riding high, right? Everything is perfect in Jessica's world, right, Liana?
Yeah, everything's turning up for Jessica. Nothing could go wrong this week. It's just, she has her boyfriend back in the house, which hasn't derailed her game at all. She has the HOH. She's got the nominations that she wants, and she won veto. I mean, my goodness.
Yeah, everything's turning up for Jessica. John, were you thinking this is Jessica's week? She's going to steamroll this game at this point?
Well, we've all been talking for weeks and weeks about how Jessica's trajectory is just going to go upwards, and she's definitely going to become like a new fan favorite. And now the opportunity has seized. Like, you've listed everything out, and this is definitely going to be the week where she gets her way and becomes the next big queen of Big Brother.
This is far too much sarcasm for one podcast, guys. we got to tone this down.
This is what happens. This is what happens when you let me run rampant. Like the other, Brent would be calling me out at this point, but you guys you're just like in my sarcasm. It's just, we're just exuding it. It's great.
All right,
let's see if we can go.
Burst the bubble.
Yeah, we can go an hour without saying one sincere thing. I think we can make it happen.
Ooh, that'll be fun. That's kind of like when Dominique speaks in riddles. This podcast is entirely in sarcasm.
Yes. All right. So Jessica has HOH, and she decides to nominate Josh and Ramses, and this is a questionable move, to say the least. Going after Josh is understandable. Josh was insulting them during the HOH competition. He's definitely coming after them. He hates them. They hate him. But putting up Ramses next to him seems like a sketchy move here, right, Lita?
Yeah, so Jessica and Cody are doing the thing where they want to make the non-controversial move. And we've talked about this on some of the live feed updates where they're like, okay, Cody tried to take a huge shot and it blew up in our face. So let's do the exact opposite of that and put up people that no one cares about. But what they are missing is that when you put up two people that no one cares about, either of them can go home, because Ramsey doesn't have allies right now. He doesn't have any ride or dies. So when you put up Ramses as the pawn, Josh is not a lock to go home. And that's what we're seeing, is that they just are missing the fact that people do not care about Ramses enough to make sure that Josh goes home this week.
Yeah, it's so funny because actually Jessica said Ramses has nothing to offer the other side.
Right. Yeah. Jessica, how can you not put the pieces together here?
Right. So I don't understand, if that's your line of logic, then wouldn't it make sense for them to get rid of him if he has nothing to offer the other side? So like you mentioned, this is a complete, overcorrection of what happened with Paul, with Cody putting up Paul during that first week. But just the execution and the logic is just completely flawed.
Yes, and Paul and friends immediately saw the opening and decided, yeah, it was really dumb of them to put Ramses up on the block. Let's just let's take him out and keep Josh to go after them. That seems like a solid plan to us. And yes, I've decided to just call Paul and his ever-shifting alliance just Paul and friends, because it used to be just like the showmance, but it's not even the showmances anymore. It's just like Paul's group of friends. That's all it is, right, John?
Well, that's kind of what CBS wants to rename the show at this point. So I think it's really, really appropriate. And yeah, I want to touch on something that Liana said, because I think it's interesting. We, as viewers and as people who talk about the show, we have this constant back and forth where we want to see good gameplay, but then we also want to see exciting gameplay. And we kind of got the worst of both worlds, because Cody coming back into the house was going to be this big, explosive, exciting thing. Because he was going to be mad and he was going to want revenge, and then also like he's kind of not the best game player, but then somehow he seems to have kind of learned a lesson, but maybe it's not the right lesson, because he's come back in and he's like, wow, in week 1 I nominated 1/3 of the house, and that was a bad move. So now I'm going to play the opposite, which on paper in his little world where he doesn't have perfect information, that kind of makes sense, but that's totally the wrong move, and it's also the most boring move this week.
Yeah, but it's going to end up resulting in if this flip ends up happening, like it's going to end up being exciting. So yeah, it's kind of dull right now with Paul and friends, which I love this concept, Taran, because it's kind of like Menudo, where they just kept like swapping people out. Oh, I'm old.
Roundtable.
Like a boy. Never mind. Anyway, the point is that you rotate people out. Notice. Sorry, I'm like Meg, just like hobbling down the slip and slide. But anyway, so yeah, I think that while there's boring feeds maybe going on right now, ultimately this is going to end up being exciting once a flip happens and Josh ends up staying.
Yeah, it's very possible that we get a repeat of the week 1 vote where Cody just kind of stands up angrily, like, what? Again? And then he goes straight to Mark, because he's totally going to blame Mark. And he's going to be like, Mark, you did this to me again. Mark's going to be like, no, I love you, Cody. No, I would never do this again. I promise.
Or somehow still blame Ramses. Like,
like Ramses is out the door and he's like, this is all Ramses' fault.
Somehow Ramses hinky votes.
Most weeks when someone gets voted out, like, they generally clap, they all hug, and they're like, we'll see you later. But I want everyone to be like, Ramses, what did you do? What did you do? Like, everyone's just like, you screwed this up.
He probably got like $25,000 more on top of it to like flip the vote, so they'll be extra mad.
Ramses gets $25,000 if he leaves.
Can you believe that, kid? Unbelievable. Unbelievable. Okay, so Jessica did seem a little bit skeptical, as Liana, you pointed out. She talked about like, well, why wouldn't they just flip? If I were them, I would flip on Josh. I would flip on Ramses. I would take Ramses out. What does he offer them? And Josh could come after us. This seems like a logical plan. Maybe we should use the veto. And it did seem like they were going to come close to doing this. Cody was against it. And ultimately, Jess is saying, okay, here we go. I need to talk to some people about the vote. I need to talk to some people that I can trust. Let me go talk to Paul and Elena. This seems like those are the right 2 people to talk to, right, Liana?
Oh, that definitely the 2 people that you want to talk to. And considering the fact that Alex is the one who's on the fence and she's on the fence, you're not going to go talk to her. I mean, Elena is one out of the vote. Like, she doesn't know what the vote is going to be. So clearly talking to her is not going to do any good. And then Paul is the mastermind of this flip. So he's also not going to give you what you need. And those are the only 2 people that she was going to talk to. And I don't even think she ended up talking to Paul. I think it was just Elena. And then Elena relayed that, yeah, of course, Paul's on board with this. Obviously.
Yeah. Okay. The people she needs to talk to, Jason, because he runs his mouth like crazy. He would absolutely spill if he was pressed too hard. She needs to talk to Matt. Obviously, she doesn't know this, but Matt is the one with the most amount of cold feet going into this plan. He's kind of nervous about the fact that he's going to anger some people. And Kevin, who's just like a total loose cannon, who like might just spill the plan because he wants to keep Ramses and throw somebody else up there. Like, if she had spoken to any of those people, I feel like she could have gotten enough. She didn't need much. She just needed a feeling, and she was going to use that veto. But Elena just completely soothed everything over, and ultimately Jessica does not use the veto. John, it's not looking good for them.
No, part of it is like you're saying, is that they're not communicating with the right people. One of the lessons that they didn't learn from their whole week 1, week 2 debacle and blindside was that they just spend all day cuddling and canoodling up in the HOH room, and they're not communicating with everybody in the house. So it's like there's still a few days before the eviction, and there's lots of game that could still be played. Like, they could flip it back, but I don't think that they're not asking the right questions to the right people, and they don't seem to have any interest in doing it. So I think that we are going to get a blindside on Thursday in relation to them.
Well, so there are a couple things that stand out to me. One being the fact that there is today, Mark and Elena have been going around saying, we want to ask who is, who's everybody voting for, just to kind of double check and just to make sure. Paul's, of course, trying to get them to not do that. But WhistleNut has started freaking out about this. He's so nervous. So he's going to hang around Josh all day today so that they never come and ask him. So he never has to talk about it. He's currently playing chess or was at least when we got on this podcast, with Mark right now. So I'm a little worried that he might end up spilling the beans. But of course, it's too late. It doesn't matter. So WhistleNut is this huge liability. But it seems that Jess, because she's not willing to talk to anybody else, it's going to end up going through. But on top of that, Ramses is awful, and we can talk about this later, but he has done also a horrible job in getting Jessica to use the veto or putting up any resistance at all whatsoever.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, is that the window is just like closing rapidly, because there was an opportunity there for Jason and Kevin, who were like, they're in on Ramses. They're not really totally feeling this plan, but they're going to go with it because no one made any effort to flip them when there was an opportunity. And now the window is just closed. It's too late.
That's the benefit of keeping the plan a secret, is that Jessica and Cody did not know who to go to. They didn't even know that they needed to do any work, which, you're in the Big Brother house. You need to be doing work all the time. You need to make sure that things are happening. You need to be communicating with people. Even if you're not going to them to talk strategy, just socialize with people, because you'll get a good understanding of where they stand at the very least. But it's just not happening. And they've made an effort to reach out to people more, but the people they've reached out to are people like Christmas, who is dead set against them because they turned their back on her. People like Paul, who is dead set against them because they turned their back on him. And people like Mark and Elena, who they actually don't trust and aren't going to let in, even though they are the people that would come back to them. So it's just they're just not playing this right. Do you think that, Lita, there is any chance that they're going to learn their lesson finally after this week and be like, okay, we went too far in that direction, then we went too far in that direction. Maybe we can finally settle on a good middle plan. We do have the halting hex still. We have a good shot at this. Can they do anything about this?
I really think that, honestly, they're the type of players that if they get blindsided again, they're just going to be like, ugh, this whole house is against us. No matter what we do, we tried this, we tried that. They're always just going to try to screw us, and they're going to get a chip on their shoulder from it, and they're not going to learn anything, and they're not going to be able to correct, because they're just going to see it as like a personal attack where it's just us against the world, because they love this thing where it's just the two of them against the whole house. I really do not think they're going to learn.
Well, I don't know if this is in Jessica's benefit, I should give her this, but she said that, if people are going to vote Ramses out anyway, they're the next targets regardless, meaning Jody. That's a little bit of a defeatist attitude, and essentially is like, well, it doesn't matter, exactly what you said, Lita, no matter what happens, we're on the outs, if Ramses ends up going home, if these people aren't willing to work with us. So I think that they're just going to go, all out and just completely try to burn the house down and go against everybody, when this flip ends up happening.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing. They do have Mark on their side, but do you think that they will push Mark away? Will Paul and friends be able to pull Mark and Elena back in? I feel like Elena is very close with Paul, but how are they going to feel after being blindsided? It seems as though Paul doesn't plan on telling them. He's planning on letting the vote be 7-3, with them being not in the know. How are they going to feel? Are they going to come back to Paul and friends, John?
I really am curious to see how that plays out, because we haven't seen Mark or Elena be burned really badly yet in this game. And so it'll be interesting to see what their reactions are. And Jessica, we don't want to give her too much credit, because she's 100% put herself in this situation, but she does have this halting hex power, and she's shown a little bit of ingenuity in how she wants to use it. She's discussed a little bit with Cody. Cody knows that she has it, that she wants to talk. Maybe if she has to tell some people she has the power, she wants to not tell them exactly what the power is and start implying that maybe it does other things, or just kind of scare people from putting them up. So she's showing a little bit of game knowledge in there. So when and if things do blow up, I don't necessarily think it's going to be completely game over for them, because let's say worst case scenario for them, both Cody and Jessica go up. She could use the halting hex, but she may be able to use it to avoid the block for at least a week or so entirely. So it's not entirely over for them. And yeah, who knows? Mark and Elena may not want to go crawling back to Paul. Like, everyone has a final straw, and maybe we'll see if this is it.
Well, so going back to Mark and Elena especially wants to gravitate to wherever the power is, and Paul recognizes that. So one of the reasons why he's not telling them is because he's banking on the fact that Elena, and then by proxy Mark, will come back to their side once they realize that this is where the numbers are, this is where the majority is.
Yeah, I mean, Paul's plan right now is he's telling people we're going to put up Cody and Jessica next week, and when we do that, Mark and Elena will come crawling back because they're going to want to be on our side. The issue with that, obviously, is that that Cody and Jessica have the halting hex, which will probably prevent them from even going up on the block in the first place. Because again, who's going to waste an HOH on them? But even if it doesn't happen that way, they could still potentially win allies by saying, "Look, this isn't going to go through. You might as well be on board with us because those guys are going to get screwed over." So it's a tricky situation. Lita, do you think that this is a good move for Paul to blindside Cody and Jessica like this?
I think to blindside Cody and Jessica is fine. I think to blindside Mark and Elena is the problem. I really think that to keep them in the dark has worked out for him insofar as Jessica happened to pick Elena as the person that she went to, which is, I honestly feel like was a stroke of luck for Paul, was that Jessica decided Elena is the person I'm going to get all my information from, and whatever she says I'm going to trust, because Elena was super convincing because she wasn't lying, because she really thought that this was the plan. And I think that it's good that she was in the dark for that, because she didn't have to lie to Jessica, and she could be really convincing that Ramses is going home. But I think that ultimately, in the long run, when this vote happens and Mark and Elena feel really betrayed, I really do feel like this could be a bad thing for Paul. And yeah, go ahead.
I do think that, he needs to let Elena know before the vote. He can't leave Elena in the dark. She feels very close to Paul, and I think he's taking that for granted. I think that, once she knows that he's lied to her and is capable of lying to her, she will never forget that. And she will always be like, well, you lied to me. You didn't let me in on it. I'm not as close to you as I thought I was. And that's creating an enemy in the house, or a potential enemy at the very least. And that's not what you want to be doing, especially when you have the option to just give her a heads up and be like, hey, listen, I feel like maybe we should change the vote. And I think she'd be amenable to it. I don't think that she'd be super opposed to this either. Right, Liana?
Yeah, I think she would be totally fine with it, actually. I know that Paul is concerned because of Elena's relationship with Jessica, that's the reason why he doesn't want to tell her. And then also there's this whole issue with Mark. It's weird to think that Mark is somehow becoming a social pariah within the house, considering Josh still exists. But he is being ostracized by not only Cody and Jessica, who theoretically he's on their side, but then of course Paul and friends, or Paul and co, all of them are also against Mark. And so I think because Paul recognizes that Mark is on the outside, by pushing Elena away a little bit, he's able to then push Mark even further away.
Yeah, Mark is becoming quite the target at the moment. And honestly, I do think that going into next week, because of the halting hex, it looks like Mark is going to be in the most amount of danger, because he's going to be the backup target after Jess and Cody, especially with Ramses gone. There's really nobody else to point to for Paul's group. So Mark really needs to hope that he or Cody basically win that HOH, or I think Mark's in a lot of trouble, right, Jon?
Much to Elena's credit as well, she has implied pretty heavily that when push comes to shove, she wouldn't mind cutting Mark. And so I think that is definitely a bad sign for Mark. And then the other thing too, going back to what you guys were talking about with Paul and Elena, their relationship has been sort of developing in interesting ways. I mean, overall, this is a very touchy-feely cast, but like Elena and Paul have been doing their own share of like sitting really close to each other. And Elena gives Paul lots of like back rubs and massages, and he asks her to tickle him all the time and stuff like that. And which creates an interesting dynamic, because it's starting to drive a wedge between Elena and Mark, because he clearly doesn't like that, even if he's not voicing that opinion. But it's also creating, I think, part of the reason that Paul is taking Elena's trust for granted is because she's being very touchy-feely with him. I think that he thinks that like, oh, she's clearly into me in some sort of way, and so she'll just do what I say. But if he clues Elena in onto what's happening, then that will smooth things over for Paul. And then later on, if they end up targeting Cody and Jessica and also Mark, then I think Elena would know to cut ties with Mark there. So really, I think a lot of where Paul's game goes doesn't matter who gets voted out, but sort of whether or not he informs Elena or not.
So are we saying that Paul is basically doing an evolved version of the Marvin strategy from Big Brother 5 when he was like trying to like kiss Diane to make what's his Drew jealous? He's but he knows not to go all the way with the kissing. He's just doing some tickling. It's like
deep cut.
that's
Pretty much the same thing.
What Marvin should have been doing was tickling people instead of kissing them. I mean,
who wants to be tickled?
This time next year, we're going to be talking about the Marvin strategy and how it's really worked out for a lot of people in the last few years. We just never picked up on it.
He's an innovator, a game changer.
A game changer, yeah. Add Marvin to the cast of Game Changers for Big Brother.
Lita, are you saying you don't want to be tickled?
No, never. Oh my God. I
don't think anyone wants to be tickled.
No one wants to. I'm not ticklish at all, so it's just people touching me with wiggly fingers.
It's
just
worse
like
when
the
you are
worst
ticklish.
experience ever. Oh my God, I hate it.
Are wiggling fingers worse than regular fingers?
They're like spirit fingers, but more
but
pointed.
evil.
But evil?
Yes.
I don't know what the evil spirit fingers are. It's probably something in the den of temptation.
Yes.
Oh, man. Maybe if Ramses learned how to tickle people, he'd be able to be a little more effective in the game.
Yeah. Because the striptease works so well for Crawford / Malcolm / Cameron.
Yeah.
Speaking of Malcolm, / Cameron / Crawford / whatever, Carmen. He's back on Twitter. Give him a follow, Cameron Hurd 210, I believe.
Oh, and you're not going to plug Jillian's Instagram? She's back on social.
You also have to plug Dominique's spoken word album.
I'm sure that they're all tuning in right now. Hello to all three of you. You are all of our favorites.
Malcolm needs some love. We know he listens to the podcast. He went out in an unfortunate way. Let's show some love to Crawford. Whatever it was, people don't even remember his name. That's how much love.
Whoever you are our favorite, and we will never forget you.
True. It's very true. But speaking of Ramses, Liana, you mentioned this earlier. He has just been he's been doing nothing to save himself. He had one conversation with Jess, and that was about the extent of his campaigning.
Okay, so he had one extremely short conversation with Jessica in which Jessica told him to go talk to Alex and Jason to make sure that they were on board with keeping Ramses. Ramses could apparently not execute that plan. It was far too complicated for him. Kevin then dropped several hints saying, hey, Ramses, maybe you just want to go check with Jessica, just make sure everything's okay. He does this multiple times, also too difficult for Ramses. So I don't quite understand. Is he a real super fan? Because I have never wanted to hear, and the pawns always go home more from him. It's so frustrating.
Leon, I think that what we are confused about is that he's not a super fan of Big Brother. He's a super fan of the Paul and Friends morning show, because all morning on the live feeds, like the entire collective psyche of the Big Brother fan community was sending Ramses these waves, like, please go do something. But he was sitting in the room with the rolly couch, and they were all doing like, what's your favorite breakfast food? And like they were doing all those questions. I think he's a super fan of that show, and it was our mistake.
Yeah, that was key. I mean, the Austin Power sex room is very important. I can understand why it would just be captivated by the friendship talks. But also, not to pile on, but I'm gonna pile on, Alex leaked to Ramses in front of him that Josh is going to be around next week. And then Jason and Christmas had to try and cover for him. So it was implied to him, told to his face several times that he might be in danger. And still, he spent the evening and morning sleeping, playing Apple Ball, and riding around on Christmas's scooter.
Yes. Note to any future house guest, if somebody accidentally lets it slip that they're planning on having somebody in the house that like is the person next to you on the block, it's never a mistake. It's never a lie. Like, it's never like, oh, I forgot that they were going home this week. No. It happened because they're going to be there next week every single time. So just don't just, excuse that away. People have been comparing Ramses to Steve. It's an obvious comparison, but man, if Steve was in this position right now, he'd be all over the place. People would be like, he's so sketchy, but he'd be all over the place. He would have sniffed this out in 2 seconds and would have been all over Jessica. Like, get me off the block.
Yeah.
Shout out to Chef Joe at one time that he was like, "Hey, I think we're gonna vote out Dan," to Dan Giesling's face in the dark.
Oh, that was so great.
Yeah, I was gonna say the on not to make too many Survivor comparisons today, but the Carter in the Philippines when he's talking to Penner and he's like, "Yeah, it's either gonna be Jeff or Penner," and Penner's like, "I hope it's not Penner."
Oh my
I mean,
God.
Dan himself let it slip to Frank that he was planning on taking him out. Like it happens all the time. You need to be like looking out for it. But man, you want to like. You believe what you want to believe, and and Ramses wants to believe that he's safe. So he's hearing all of this stuff that should be telling him otherwise, but he's just like, no, that's not right. That can't be true. I don't want it to be true. But what he should be doing is, regardless of whether he believes it's true or not, going to Jessica with that information and being like, hey, here are all the things I've heard. If Jess heard a fraction of the things that Ramses has heard, she would have taken him off the block. She was very close to doing it. It's another one of those things where, like, last week, Dominique had so many outs to save herself. And this week, Ramses, plenty of outs to save himself. Jessica, plenty of outs to save her own plan. And it's just not happening. They just keep coming so close and then nothing's happening. And I think I have to credit Paul for this, for creating an atmosphere where nobody feels comfortable talking about this stuff too much. He's keeping everyone quiet. And I think I really have to give Paul the credit here. But I know some people are, oh, Taran, you give Paul too much credit. So Jon, are you with me here?
Yeah, definitely. Like, we've seen it in Big Brother and in other shows like Survivor, where there are certain players who are successfully able to create an atmosphere of like, that's the enemy. We do not talk to the enemy. There's no reason to talk to them. We don't even need to talk about game. You shouldn't be talking about game if you're not in front of me, because I'm not talking about it. Like, the decision's already made. But I do think that there's still, even though I know the veto ceremony is over, and maybe this is my wishful thinking, just because I like to see flips happen, even if it's multiple times. But just as we were getting ready to come online and have this discussion, Christmas and Ramses were talking, and she told him that she's planning on throwing a sympathy vote to Josh. The way that she characterized it was like, it's fine, you're fine, but I feel like I owe Josh one because he's voted to keep me. And so, like, just so you know, I'm planning on voting for that. And so, like, maybe, like, there might be this long shot where maybe that gives Ramses the kick in the butt that he needs to be like, maybe I should double check with a couple people. Because he is enough of a fan that I think that if it finally wakes up in his own head that he needs to do something, I think he does know the steps he needs to take. So it's not 1,000% guaranteed.
Yeah, I think that brings up an interesting. But I think we should talk about, like, does Ramses have a shot to stay this week? Liana, what do you think?
Well, actually, so I think there are multiple things to unpack that you just brought up. One is, does Ramses have a shot to stay? We can discuss that. But the other thing is that Christmas hinky vote, because that actually was a conversation that happened earlier today with her and Jessica, and kind of, I think there are a lot of things to talk about with regards to that. But going back to whether or not Ramses could stay. Absolutely. I don't think that this is actually set in stone. I do think that Paul has created somewhat of an atmosphere where it's not being discussed. But Matt, when he was drinking on Saturday, apparently decided to start playing Big Brother. Because, you know, alcohol makes people do a lot of crazy things. And for Matt, I guess it makes him play Big Brother. He was actually having a conversation with Christmas about how he's still worried about Josh staying in the house and thinks that this isn't necessarily a good move. And Christmas was kind of agreeing with him a little bit. Whether or not she was playing him, I don't know. But if Matt and Raven decide to stick with Cody and Jessica, then that's a 4-5-5 tie. And Jessica could break it in favor of Ramsey staying in the house.
Yeah, Matt is definitely the loose link here. He has been very cautious about this plan. And honestly, looking at it from Matt's perspective, I do think he's right in questioning it. I'm not sure this is the best move for Matt. I mean, I think from his perspective, he's thinking like, I don't want to do this right before jury. I want to make sure I make jury. But also in terms of like, it's not really his problem if Josh leaves. You know, it's not his problem if Jess and Cody go after Paul next week, which they do plan on doing if they win HOH. So it's great for him if those two sides war it out. He's not on anyone's radar. But if he is one of the people that turns against Jess and Cody and blindsides them, where Mark and Elena stay faithful, then he is one of the potential pairs that could be targeted going into next week. Lita, what do you think?
Yeah, well, the problem is that even though it isn't his problem if Paul is targeted, he thinks it is, right? And that's what matters, is that he is investing so much in these allies that he doesn't necessarily need, but he isn't willing to cut. You know, he's so worried about this plan to take out Ramses because he's like, oh, well, you know, one of us could be next. And Paul is like, oh, well, it's going to be me. I'll take the hit. And Matt is like, yeah, but I don't want that. I don't want to be in this game without you. You know, like all these things. He has all these like insane loyalties to these people and can't see beyond that. He's just decided like these people are important to me and he can't see beyond that to what is actually good for his game. And I think that's ultimately going to be Matt's downfall.
Well, Matt is motivated by trying to get to jury like that. Yeah. He's mentioned that is a priority for him. But I will say, yes, Lita, he did say, you know, Paul, I want you to stay in this game. I don't want to play this game without you. Today in this conversation, he kind of reiterated that, you know, his individual chances of going up on the block are going to increase. They're going to go up 100%, maybe even triple, if he goes through with this move. So I think there's maybe this was the alcohol. This is the jolt that he needed to kind of turn his brain on to think, you know, maybe you should start thinking about you not going home. I think it's still rooted in the fact that he wants to make jury, which is unfortunate, but you know, it's possible that he's starting to think about this. I go back and forth about whether or not this is actually a good move for Matt, because by keeping Josh in the house, that's somebody who is very, very close to Paul and who Paul I can see wanting to take as the final two goat to the end. So if you're able to get rid of Josh, that's someone from Paul's side, because Paul and co, Matt and Raven are on the outsides of that. And so if, yes, you have the warring factions, you might be able to eliminate them that way, but Josh is also a solid number. So by eliminating him, you also dwindle Paul's side. So I think that Matt and Raven are in still a very good position. And so that's why it's kind of hard to determine, because it's going to be several steps down the line when we learn the ramifications of this decision in particular.
Josh is also just a really loud, obnoxious, volatile presence in the house. And I think for someone like Matt, who is the antithesis of all of those things, it can only help to keep Josh around, because Josh will always be louder and always be pissing more people off. You know, we talk a lot on these podcasts about strategy all the time, but like there, you know, you have to live in the house with these people. And I think that Josh is probably very hard to live with. And so there's going to come a time where people are just like, it's not worth it. He's just not worth keeping around anymore. But until that point, if Matt can keep someone like Josh in the house, no one will ever be looking at Matt, because Josh is always going to be there running around, screaming, interrupting people's pool games and dumping condiments on people and calling people meatballs. And like, he's just always drawing attention to himself. And so I think that that's another reason to keep Josh around.
Well, so I would agree with that. I think that Josh is an obvious mouth shield. The guy is so loud and so obnoxious. I'm sorry, the food that must not be named shield. So he is that person. But the thing is that once he goes, who's the next mouth shield in line? You know, it's somebody like maybe Whistlenut or Paul. And so I think, like you said, because Matt is so quiet, I mean, they called him into the DR today, and Kevin and Paul were like, is he even on the show? I don't think I've ever heard him be called into the DR before. Yeah. So, you know, he is so quiet that there's still so many mouth shields before him, you know. So if you get rid of Josh, like maybe that's not such a big deal.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you, Liana. I think that this is probably his best move to keep Ramses in the game and to actually go through with the plan to get Josh out. The problem is you don't want to piss Paul off too much, but I think there's a way to do this without angering Paul to the extent that he's going to come after you anytime soon. I mean, Paul has a lot of other people to have to deal with. I mean, Ramses obviously is somebody that Paul will have to deal with eventually if he's still in the game, and Jessica and Cody are still high on his radar, plus the fact that Mark and Elena will have also just voted that way. I think he has to get Paul on board with this a little bit in order to make it really make sense for him. But I do think that down the line, this is the better move. It's just a matter of like, does he have the tools to make the move, let alone conceive of the move? I don't think the answer is yes for either of those options. I think that he's kind of coming to the decision where he kind of wants to make it, but I think the only reason he wants to do that is so he'll make jury. I don't think he recognizes all of the other trappings around it. So it's a weird situation, and ultimately I think that what it comes down to is it's never going to happen unless Raven also wants to do this. And I haven't heard any doubt from Raven in terms of like her wanting to keep Ramses instead of Josh, right, Lita?
Yeah, she's never expressed any interest in that. And it's so hard to talk about the optimal move for someone like Matt who just has no interest in making it. because he has no interest in winning the game, seemingly. So it's hard to sit here and be like, okay, well, X, Y, and Z would happen if Matt made this move, but Matt doesn't have the faculties nor the ambition to go through with it. So it's almost just like a completely theoretical conversation, which is a frustrating type of Big Brother player to talk about.
I mean, I do hope though that once they do make jury, you know, because Matt his tendency is to play cautiously. Maybe, fingers crossed, once he actually gets to jury, then there'll be something where it's like, okay, now that I've made jury, I might be able to be willing to make moves to win. But when Paul was having that conversation with Matt and Raven, Paul was like, I'm willing to make these moves. You guys are newbies, and so you're just playing cautiously. And I think that that's so true. And I think that because of Matt playing cautiously, they would never, if he got Raven on board, they would never force the 5-5 tie. Like, I do think that Matt and Raven would want to get Paul on board and then have everybody vote out Josh in the same way that Ramses might go this week.
I'm not willing to go full Alex Kidwell here, but I will say that I don't believe for a moment that Matt is just playing for jury or that he doesn't actually care to win. Like, I do believe that Matt actually wants to win. I just don't know if he has that much of a finessed strategy. So I think he's kind of doing the week-to-week game, and I think he's looking at jury as like a milestone. So I don't think he's going to turn into this crazy flashy player, but I think that he's trying to get to jury so that he can start working towards the next stage. I think if you look week to week, he's been so removed from the game that he's never been stepping closer to or farther away from jury or from danger, really. So he hasn't had so much incentive to start trying to make waves. So I still do have some hope that like he is trying to play.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I do like that I'm seeing some self-interest from Matt. I do think that it is telling of what will happen with Matt down the line if he makes it there. Typically this archetype is the kind that gets really competitive when they see the money. And I want to see that from Matt. I'm seeing a tiny little bit of it. He's starting to think about like, maybe I want to make sure that people aren't coming after me. Maybe I want to make sure I'm good next week. And what's the best move to ensure that for myself? He's thinking about that. He's not doing anything about it yet, but he's thinking about it, which is better than thinking about cereal, right, Liana?
My biggest concern for Matt at the moment is Ramses is now wearing his clothes because he lost a bet because of pool. If Ramses goes home, Matt's not going to have any clothes. He's only going to be down to one shirt.
That's fine.
Something that you guys, I think that Taran brought this up, but you guys all talked about it, is the idea of like someone trying to convince Paul to switch, or that whether or not Paul would be amenable. But do you guys really think that anyone could convince Paul to switch his vote? Like, Paul loves Josh and wants to keep around his chaos. Like, he said multiple times that Josh's chaos is really, really good for his game. So do you think that there's any world where any player could actually convince Paul that keeping Ramses is a good idea?
Well, it would be interesting because let's say Matt, for some reason, maybe they get another alcohol delivery, decides to put his foot down and say, no, Raven and we have decided that we're going to keep Ramses. Mm-hmm. In that case, if, this kind of theoretical unmovable object happens, what does Paul do in that circumstance? Does he let the group go to the 5-5 tie? I don't think that he would want to do that, because then still the tie, because Jessica is the tiebreaker, gets broken in their favor. And I think that is possibly a circumstance in which Paul could cave. But I mean, the likelihood of that, very low.
Yeah, it's interesting. We haven't seen Paul in a situation where he hasn't gotten his way yet. I'm not exactly sure how that's going to go for him. Usually he blows up. That's what happened last season, and it's what started to happen this season when he was put up on the block, or it was attempted to be put on the block. He blew up a bit, but then realized, oh wait, I'm actually still in control. Okay, all right, that's good. So it's hard to say. I don't think Paul will go quietly into that night. I think Paul will fight this to the death. I think he'll make his last stand on Josh's grave, which is, it's funny to me to picture like Matt trying to convince Paul. Like, how does Matt see that work? Like, Matt's gonna be like, all right, Paul, listen, I'm gonna give you something. It's my most cherished possession. I'm gonna give you this bowl of Captain Crunch. Listen. I know it's too much, but I really need your vote this week. And I feel like if we share this bowl of Captain Crunch, it'll really help us understand that we have mutual interests. Right, Lita?
Yeah, I thought you were going to say one of his 2 shirts is his most prized possession. Matt has so...
Ramses.
What if he starts
so
seeing the
little in this
future
house.
in the cereal? Like he sees, like he starts seeing in the crunch.
Like in the fire.
No, like alphabet
Yeah.
cereal,
Yeah.
whatever, like spells out a prophecy.
Says vote Paul.
I really do not think, especially someone like Matt, is going to be the person to convince Paul to change his plan that he has built up in his mind. I really cannot see a scenario this week or any other week where Paul masterminds his plan that he's giving DRs where he's saying like he's the puppet master and everybody's listening to him. I really think that Paul is too proud and too confident to ever change his plan just based on something as silly as new information or different perspectives. You know, I just really feel like he relishes being in control of this house and is too proud to change that opinion. And I really do feel like that is going to bite him at some point in this game.
As long as he doesn't throw relish on anybody, then it'll be fine.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I've made a lot of comparisons. He's playing very similarly to, at least along the same guidelines as Derek did. And Derek was a similar case where like we never really saw Derek not get his way. And, you know, how does Derek react when that happens? I think it'll be interesting to see if Paul is able to adapt when he finally doesn't get his way, if that does eventually happen. But for now, I do think that there's no way Paul is flipping on this vote. I think that he will do everything in his power. He'll run to Elena to try to make her flip if he feels like he can't get Matt and Raven. But I honestly, when talking about does Ramses have a shot here, I feel like there's obviously a lot of time, but I think a lot would have to change before this vote flips. And I think that much more likely than not, we're going to see Ramses go home here, right, Lita?
Yes, I completely agree. And I see where you're coming from, Liana, where obviously it's possible there are people who are discontent with this plan, but I just feel like it's too late. Everybody has drank the Kool-Aid and everybody is kind of set on this plan. And I just, now that the veto has not been used, I really see the window of opportunity is closed.
Yeah, I think Ramses is just, you know, like Jessica said, he doesn't bring anything to the other group. He doesn't bring anything. So the benefit of keeping him, you know, even if he is the one person or, you know, he is talking to Matt and Raven the most when it comes to strategy, but even that is not that much. And so I just don't think it's worth, you know, making any type of grandstand in order to keep him. Like, you know, keep your Dylan Thomas poems. Like, we're going to be cool this week.
All right. So we've seen a couple different strategies in terms of how these people plan on going through with this vote. So as we talked about, Christmas is already saying that, hey, I want to give a sympathy vote to Josh. I want to, you know, throw him a vote. He voted for me. I just feel like it's the right thing to do. I don't want it to be a shutout. We have Alex, who has been to Jessica saying things like, I'm not sure which way I'm going to vote yet. And then you have somebody like Paul and the rest of them who are just like saying, no, definitely we're voting Josh out. A lot of different strategies here. Christmas is the most recent and the most bold right now. It's really setting Cody and Jessica off at the moment. They're like, wait, why is Christmas doing this? No, we don't want any of this
Especially
happening.
because they trust her so much for some reason that definitely is founded on logic.
Yeah.
Well, they don't really trust her, though. Like, they've said multiple times that they want to get her out before, like, especially before Josh, for example. So, and I think that this hinky vote is actually really, or I guess not even a hinky vote. This sympathy vote is actually really interesting because, so from the way I understand it, maybe you guys can correct me, Xmas had a conversation with Jessica, and I think that this was off the feeds. We didn't actually see it, where she said that she wants to be the one vote for Josh to stay because, you know, Josh has always had her back. I don't understand the logic behind doing this. Does anybody know?
There really isn't too much logic behind it, right? Because Ramses won't be on the jury. So, I mean, I guess maybe if she's playing really, really far ahead and she wants to keep Josh on her side going into the future, but like, you know,
she's telling Jessica this. She's telling Jessica, I'm gonna, even though, you know, Josh, in Jessica's mind, Josh is going home. Christmas still wants to throw the sympathy vote for Josh to stay.
So you're saying, like, why is she even telling Jessica that? Maybe it has something
to do with... Why would she do this at all?
When the blind side goes down, then Jessica can say that, or then Christmas can say that, well, like, I told you what I was going to do. Like, maybe she can feign ignorance about the rest of the house or something.
I mean, possibly. I just have to think that if you're Jessica and you know that Christmas is going to throw the sympathy vote, then in Jessica's mind, in my mind, if I were her, I would think that this is where the flip came from. This is where the flip started, because as far as Jessica knows, it was going to be a 10-0 vote. So now it's 9-1. And this is kind of the opening of the floodgates that's going to start all of this. So this is why, like, I really don't understand this logic from Christmas.
Yeah, you said, why is Christmas doing that? So I was just trying to think of like where in her head could it maybe even begin to be logical. But I think this touches on like what Taran said about the different strategies here. Like when you want to do a blind side on who is the HOH, or when you want to go against the House, I just think that you have to be really, really careful about when you start that. Like whoever's idea it was when it was like, let's start talking about flipping the vote from Josh to Ramsey's, like maybe not do it so early, because it's, you can keep information, even if you're playing like Paul and you're trying to keep information in control. You can't do it 100% perfectly for like 7 days at a time. Like I think that they all started this a little too early. I do think that Ramsey's, I think it's kind of a done deal, but I think that it may not be a total blindside. I do think that those leaks are already starting to happen, and I think Christmas is just the beginning of it.
Well, I think in regards to the Christmas thing, like, I don't know if she's necessarily doing this on purpose. I think that you're right, John, that in Christmas's mind, it might just be like, oh, well, I might not be blamed as much for this flip because like I told them it was just because I felt bad for him and like it was just a sympathy thing. But I think it actually could work out for her, because if we look at who Cody is the most mad at after the last time the House flipped on them, it's Mark, because he was the one who told them the whole time that he was with them and then he flipped last. And Taran and I talked this morning about how that is backwards logic. Like you shouldn't trust the person who is the last to flip on you. You should be the least trustful of the person who flipped on you first. And I think maybe this will work out for Christmas, because they'll be like, okay, well, at least Christmas told us what was happening, and they'll be more mad at all the people who, you know, completely bold-faced lied to them and didn't tell them where the vote was going.
It's like the E2 Brute thing. Like if it's like the last person that you thought was going to turn on you, like that's the one that maybe not logically because they aren't the source of the flip, but like that's the one that hurts you emotionally the most.
Yeah, it's an interesting situation because all of these people are planning on doing this flip and planning on blindsiding these people. And now it's just a matter of maneuvering, because it's which of us is going to get hit by this? Like, who are they going to come after? Who is going to be the face of this flip? And I think Paul is the obvious choice here in terms of who they're going to think, oh, Paul flipped the votes on us. But does that mean they target Paul? Well, probably. But still, there's a lot of maneuverability around here in terms of like, if Chris, as Liana mentioned, if Christmas talks to them beforehand and is like, I want to kind of give a sympathy vote, and she's right. If this is seen as the start of the avalanche, where it's like, well, everything was fine until Christmas started talking about giving a sympathy vote, and then now all of a sudden everything's messed up, it's all Christmas's fault, then they could go after Christmas and see her as the face of this flip, even though Paul would be the obvious choice. And then you also have the problem of somebody like Matt or Raven, where they are like in a situation where they're not the face of the flip, but they are the people that Cody and Jessica might expect to flip on them the least. And if that's the case, are they going to be the most mad at them in the same way that Cody is the most mad at Mark? It's kind of a tricky situation. This is really like sort of one of the more subtle elements of Big Brother is, you know, you have your own side, but just because you have the numbers, it's not Survivor. It doesn't mean that you're going to be safe. It's a matter of making sure that within that group of numbers, you are probably stationed nicely in the middle, right? Like not the face of it, and then also not the one that's like, oh, but you know what? You know who really benefited from this is that person on the bottom who's like who's calling the shots. You want to be like just a regular soldier, like, yeah, you know what? Somebody came to me with an argument and I went along with it. I'm sorry. Like, you know, what do you want from me? Don't come after me. What? Go after Paul. He's the big loud one, right, Liana?
Yeah, Kevin is in such a great position, despite being the big loud one. He's that person that, well, I don't think he's ever going to get directly blamed for this, and I don't think he is clearly the one who benefits the most from it. So someone like him, someone like Jason, I don't think that they realize how good this is for them, but they're the two that I would see benefiting the most and would be least likely to be targeted next week, regardless of who wins HOH.
Who's in the Ian Terry sweet spot, right? Like the diagram that he outlined. Like you never want to be number one or two, or like last or second to last. Like you always want to be in the middle of whatever the current alliance is. And Kevin currently is that, and probably will be for a long time.
So we know that Cody currently wants to go after Paul. He's talked about like, I want to backdoor Paul next week if I have that option. But once this blindside happens, do we think that since, again, Jessica and Cody, they have the halting hex, they will stay in the game next week regardless of what happens. So they are going to have a couple of shots to take at winning those HOHs and taking a shot against somebody in the house. Who do we think that they're going to stick with Paul, or are they going to feel betrayed by everyone else, or are they going to feel like, again, like maybe we shouldn't take a shot at Paul because there are other people that we need to take a shot at first? Or are they going to be like, you know what, we should have taken a shot at Paul last week. Now we definitely need to take a shot at Paul. Do we think that's the move they're going to make, Lita?
I mean, if Josh stays in the house, I don't think they're just going to let that go. I think it's possible that they'll still want to take, I think that they're going to want to take a shot at Josh still, if he's still there, which I think that he will be. I think they're going to maybe try that again. Because I do think it's possible, because like we said, like it's still possible that the house flips. There aren't people who are like, you know, loving Josh to the point where he's going to be safe every week. Like it's just that they happen to put up the wrong target next to him. So I think it's still possible they could go after Josh again next week. I think they could put up Paul, and I still think that they might not figure out what's going on and still just be mad at Mark. Like
Yeah.
I really do think that they, even after this blindside, like they're not going to know where the votes were from. And I still think they're not going to trust Mark, and he could still possibly be a target. So I think the three of those are people to look out for in the next couple of weeks with Jess and Cody potentially HOHs.
Yeah,
So there's so many things to think about, right? Because there is, okay, who is it that Jess and Cody are going to blame this on? You know, who is it that they're going to be most outraged with? And what we've seen previously, based on how much Cody dislikes Mark, it's not always the logical or even the clear, you know, person that he should be mad at. So it's like trying to understand their warped mind and then apply like a logical game strategy on top of that. So it's very complicated. I could see him honestly going after so many different people. It just depends on how he interprets this blindside.
Yeah, I could see Paul pulling like a Cody in the Dominique show, going to Cody and being like, yeah, you know what? Mark did vote with you, but he was in on the plan. He was just voting with you to pretend that he was still with you. And I could see Cody buying it. I could see Cody being like, that's exactly what Mark would do to me. He's such a beta. Unbelievable. So, you know, never know. Could go any which way at this point. And with something like a blindside happening and then something like the halting hex, which introduces a lot of variants, we could see this go anywhere at this point, which I think is pretty interesting. There's still some interesting stuff happening this week.
Yeah, or this could be the vote where, sorry, didn't mean to interrupt, but this could be the vote where Jessica could finally be like, look, Cody, Alex is against us. And in 2 weeks, if Jess wins HOH again, like, it's Alex. Like, there are all of these things going on, like Liana said, with emotions laid on top of strategy, we have to figure out where it's going. And now I'm going to let Jon talk.
Oh, well, it's funny that you mentioned Alex, because I think Alex is still sort of a weak spot for Cody. Like, he's clearly with Jessica, but he has, whether you want to call it respect or like love or whatever his psychotic mind is capable of, like he has something of a weakness for Alex. If you want to refer to the Game of Thrones episode last night, right? Like he's Grey Worm's weakness, or Alex is. Like there was a talk earlier on in the week where for a minute they were talking about pulling Ramses down and using the veto, and Jessica for a moment was talking about putting up someone else like Alex in place. And like that was like, no, we're not going to do that. So I think that Alex, even though Alex has been on the other side this entire time, like is still sort of Cody's weak spot. So if Jessica really wants to throw down and be like, no, Alex is my next target, that'll be really interesting to see how strong the bonds of Jody really are.
It's just so hard to predict their behavior because, you know, they say like insanity is doing the same thing and expecting different results. Like they're insane. So I could see them doing the same thing and expecting different results, especially because somehow Jessica has a much better read on the showmances in the house than she does in the actual game. Like, please just apply that knowledge to the actual game of Big Brother, please.
Yeah. So let's finally, I feel like this is one of the more important things we have to talk about. Last night on the recap podcast, a big debate erupted about whether or not Meatball was funny. Man, Rob was like, this is dumb, it's forced. And Brent really took his sword and he was like, no, I will fight for Josh's honor. Meatball is funny. Liana, where do you come down?
I think it's at this point, it's beating a dead horse, which I think that's probably what the meatballs at Subway are made out of. But I'm so over it. I mean, Josh is exhausting to watch him. It's been like this for so long. And I think every other word out of his mouth is pretty much just meatball, which is why I want to say, like, this is the food that must not be named. I will go along with that.
He did bring up some linguine today. Right? That was some variance, right? He started
the whole food pyramid is getting in on this.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Well, maybe he could just run through, he should just do that. Run through all Italian food. Just like, all right, you chicken parm, you ciabatta.
I'm gonna definitely side with Rob here, and I really like that he brought up the whole idea of like it being like a catchphrase, being like a friendship, because that's been my relationship with it. Like last year, BB18, Paul, week 1 was like saying friendship, and I was like, this is dumb. But then like around week 3 or 4, I was like, okay, this is fun. Like I'm team friendship. This is funny. Every time he says it, it's great. And then week 5 or 6 rolled around, I was like, stop saying it, and he hasn't stopped saying it for 18 months. And I feel that way about meatball. The first time it was like, that's a weird thing to say. That's kind of lame. It's not an insult. Around the time of the pickle juice fight, I was like, haha, this is funny. But now I'm a hard no on meatball.
Well, see, the key is that Paul has both pissed and friendship. So maybe Josh needs something that's diametrically opposed to meatballs. Like, I don't know what the opposite of a meatball would be, but it's like a really good person.
Pepperonis.
Sure. And that's a really good person. So then when you do the stock watch, then you can be like, are we meatball or pepperoni?
Are you my pepperoni?
Not like the dog that Howie was going to eat.
But no, meatballs and pepperonis are not diametrically opposed. They're very
I'm thinking like
they're both circular.
I guess geometrically, they're geometrically opposed.
They're both circular.
But one's flat. One is two-dimensional.
Okay, I'm gonna say I'm Team Brent. I think that Josh is hilarious. I was never in on friendship or pissed. Like that never was funny to me. I really feel like Josh is very funny. I have not gotten tired of him at all. I understand the sentiment, but I am anti-meatball in real life, but pro-meatball as a motif on Big Brother.
I think I've just known too many Joshes. Like I've gone to too many summer camps with people like Josh where I've had to spend summers with Josh, and like nothing against him as a person, but I've lived with that before. And it's like,
now you sound like Josh, where he hurls a bunch of insults and he's like, I love you, bless you, you're a great person, deep down you got a heart of gold.
No, I just try to separate like my opinion of this as a show versus like human beings.
Yeah, I do feel like if there was more variety, if it was just like a different food every single time he insulted them, that could have some appeal, right? That could be a little fun.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. He needs to expand his food vocabulary, his food insults. I wonder, like, what's the most insulting food to be called?
I don't know. We need to ask Weird Al. Weird Al knows all about food, right?
Isn't chopped liver is already an expression?
Oh yeah. What am I now? Yeah. Chopped liver?
Yeah.
That seems like something Kevin would say. I'm amazed that hasn't come out of his mouth yet.
Speaking of Pepperoni, the dog, though, actually, we have an announcement about a potential guest for Thursday night. That yes, we're gonna have April Lewis on the podcast for the Thursday night recap. Unbelievable that we pulled that reference out of nowhere.
Oh my God, someone was tipped off.
Yeah, I'm very much looking forward to that podcast. Who like April Lewis from season 6 in the Friendship Alliance. I feel like it's very appropriate that she come on the podcast to talk about the show.
Very apt.
Do you think Pepperoni is still alive? It's been like 12 years.
Yeah, it's probably a touchy subject.
Yeah, let's maybe not mention it.
All right. So speaking of Josh, he has been all week long just hiding away, blanketing, having the sunglasses on. He's fully on board the Audrey I am done with the game plan, only he's not actually done with the game. Liana, how do you feel about Josh's strategy here?
Oh, Oscar-worthy performance, Meryl Streep written all over him. No, but first of all, the Oscar in the Big Brother house has to go to Big Meech when she angrily stormed off after that one eviction, which was just hilarious.
Hey, what about that time that Paul and Victor pretended to be mad at each other for 1 second?
That almost worked for 1 second.
For 1 second. Yeah, I mean, this is Josh's plan, and I've actually been really surprised that he's been consistent in, acting miserable, acting defeated, saying that it's hard in these BB streets. So he's taking up a little bit of the lingo. And it seems to have fooled at least the people who aren't in on the plan, which is baffling to me.
Jessica said at one point, I don't know if this was today or yesterday, but she said to Cody, I would be worried about this week, except that Josh has been crying every day.
Yeah.
So he may not be a good actor, but he's selling it to the right audience.
We've seen this strategy before where it's like, look, you have to act like you're going to go home. Usually people aren't very successful at it. They usually give it away. Like they're acting way too happy. They're being way too social and they give it away. We've never seen anybody take to a role like Josh has taken to being defeated this week. And I've got to say, I'm enjoying this like play acting from Josh. As much as I am not on the meatball train, I am on the Josh as Audrey train. How about you, Lita?
Well, first of all, I don't want to position myself as the sole person on the meatball train. Just given, like,
be on a meatball sub, if anything.
Just given my personal disposition towards meatballs in real life.
Vegan meatballs, they're V-balls. Yeah.
Well, they like IKEA veggie meatballs. I can be on that train or that sub. But what was the question?
Are you enjoying Josh's attempts at playing dead here?
Yes, of course. I am very in on Josh's acting abilities. I think that he is executing exactly what he needs to do. I think that if it were to go on for too much longer, I don't know, because he really is just like enjoying it and savoring it a little bit too much. But I think because he has the outlet where he can go and talk to the feeds and like say what he's doing, and then just be, down and dour like around other people, that he's going to be able to keep it up. And he's done it long enough that I'm not concerned about him at this point.
Yeah, we talked about it a little bit this morning, but this is like the sweet spot for Josh, where it's like, he's not the best player in the world, but give him some direction and he'll just go into it full force and be very entertaining doing so. So I'm liking blanketing Josh for now. We'll see how it goes next week.
You say blanketing like it's an internet trend, like planking.
Meatballs
it is.
Blanketing is a thing.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny because I think Mark is the one who said he was going to quit his day job because of all of the opportunities. I think Josh has a career in community theater if this whole thing works out for him.
Is community theater a career?
Yes.
Yeah. I got that on my aptitude test in high school. I'm a disappointment to my family.
Secrets reveal.
Yeah.
You all joke, but Josh is at least community theater caliber.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. I just didn't know that was a full-time job.
If Josh starts to not do well on stage, do people throw meatballs at him?
Oh, the greatest.
No, I think he loves that.
Yes, give me the meatballs.
No, he hates meatballs because Cody is the meatball.
No, but he eats meatballs. I think that's what it is. Like
we have to keep the metaphor straight, guys.
Yeah, this is the sarcasm all over again. This is just very confusing when we speak only in food puns.
All right, this is a non sequitur, but I have to bring it up before I forget. They were talking about their favorite breakfast today, and Whistlenut said that his favorite breakfast every day he has this for breakfast. It's 4 pickled eggs and a Mountain Dew. How is this man not dead? we all talk about how Raven has a fatal disease. Whistlenut's gonna die. What's a Mountain Dew?
4 pickled eggs and a Mountain Dew, but not like the Mountain Dew is involved in the pickling of the eggs. Just like
I think it's like the chaser. I don't know.
Oh my god.
Okay, here's the thing though. My dad drinks Mountain Dew as coffee every morning. Like instead of coffee, he drinks Mountain Dew. And then one time with my family, we went on a hunt to eat all of the pickled items we could find. So we had pickled eggs, pickled watermelon rind, actual pickles. It's a thing, okay?
Leon, I think you're a little too close to this to be
objective bias.
He's totally normal. It's totally normal behavior.
All right,
definitely
listen,
nothing.
This is an intervention. We're gonna bring your father in. Like this has all been a plan. We need to talk.
Yeah, well, the antifreeze that Mountain Dew is made out of, it hasn't killed him yet. So.
Is this how Jason bonded with Alex? Because she's a gamer and everyone knows Mountain Dew is the drink of gamers.
She drinks Coke though. She drinks like 8 Cokes a day.
It's true.
Oh
it's true.
God, these people. I'm gonna live to be 40 and that's it.
Don't mess with Alex's Coke. It's no good. All right. Enough about the breakfast choices of the house guests. Interesting, though, that we've got very interesting breakfast choices by all the house guests. Let's get into the stock watch. We have a bunch of people who were not participating in last week's stock watch, but I think that we all understand like where people were from last week to this week. So let's get into it. We'll start with Ramses, who's basically on his way out. I think we can all say that we should all be selling on Ramses, right, Liana?
Ugh, yeah. He's a cosplayer, right? I wish he had taken like the Dan Giesling cosplay and actually used that this week. But unfortunately, that was not the case. He's going to miss Comic-Con and he's going home.
Yeah, it's almost like poetic justice.
Comic-Con.
Yeah.
So sad.
You know, it's an interesting situation because I've been saying week after week, every week that Ramses stays in the game, the better shot he has at winning the game, because this is the kind of person that wins a lot of comps down at the end of the stretch. But man, this was some bad luck for Ramses that Jess wins HOH and he's going out on her HOH. But you can't say that it's not his fault, because he's got so many options here to take himself out of this situation, and it's just not happening. The archetype does really well, but you have to put the minimum amount of effort in, right, John?
I think that it was Steve Moses the other day who said it really best, which is that archetype does poorly early on because they are typically not the best at the social game. But once you start to sow those bonds, then you can make it deep, which we saw happen with Ian Terry. We saw it happen with Steve Moses. And we didn't see it with Cameron, obviously, but really we didn't see it with Ramses either. Ramses has now had many, many, many weeks to start making social bonds. The way that archetype gets to the end and then does really good in the trivia comps and then does the really good argument is that they have to make at least a few tight allies that are going to be willing to go to bat for them. And Ramses has completely failed at that. So I don't really think it's bad luck at all. I think that it's one of the core tenets of his game is much weaker than other people in that quote unquote nerd archetype.
Yeah, Ramses does this thing where he just wanders into the room and then hangs out for just a little bit, but not long enough to make any connection. So I don't know if he's thinking that like, well, if I spend 10 seconds now and then 10 seconds later, and then it all adds up and they'll have this connection. Like, no, that's not the case. And then he also thinks that making food, that's gonna work. It might work on Kevin, because we all know, Kevin loves it when people make him food.
Make him breakfast.
Exactly.
Makes him those pickled eggs.
Some pickled eggs and Mountain Dew. So I agree with you, John. I actually don't think it's luck at all. I think that he comes across as shady and doesn't build these connections, and that's the reason why he's going home.
Well, in terms of Cameron and his art, I think we can all agree that, like Glenn before him, if Cameron was given a shot, he would have won the game. Right, Lita?
Obviously. Oh, yeah. Glenn needs to be brought back. I really think that if the Glenn of Temptation is a thing, we need him back in the house, or maybe we can get Joey Rodriguez there too, to play for him. I think it's a good time.
I just think that Taran is like Liana with the pickled eggs, that he might be a little too close to the Cameron situation with this whole draft.
We are best friends, actually. Now, Liana, you're sounding like an embodiment of a particular Twitter account that uses exclamation marks, talking about how we need Glenn back.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
I would love to see Glenn become the next Jesse Goddards. Like, Jesse Goddards was on every single season of Big Brother for almost like 8 years. And I would love to see Glenn become that. I would love there to be a Glenn of Temptation. Like, if they bring a temptation, or they call it, whether they bring Pandora's box back, and it's like, oh, you could get a 20-minute strategy session with like one of the most memorable house guests of all time. And I would love to have Glenn come in and be like, listen, you got to hook up with everybody, and are there any coconuts in the house? We got to be careful.
Watch out for the coconut. And okay, listen, you got to pick the right bed. All right, there's a lot of strategy that goes into
number one strategy.
Okay.
I knew everything. If I had stayed in the house, I would have had this whole thing wrapped up.
But then Kevin wouldn't know who he is, but they have like the similar, I feel like the impressions of Kevin and Glenn are the same. Yeah.
Actually, wait, John, I think it's funny that you bring up Jesse, because I was thinking, there's obviously the comparison to OTT with Jason being the only vet in the house, but I was actually thinking about Paul in the context of Jesse and BB11, because it was the coup d'etat really that was necessary in order to get Jesse out of the house. And so I almost feel that unless something like that happens to Paul, like he does have a very similar kind of grip on the house, and maybe even more so than Jesse ever did.
Yeah, well, let's move on to Paul in the stock watch. He now he's no longer immune. He's officially a player who's actually in the game and not safe from being nominated. So is it time to start giving Paul credit? Is he on the rise here? This is definitely, for me at least, an impressive week from Paul, considering he should be on his way out the door, right, Lita?
Okay, so are we talking about win equity, or are we talking about like, is he gonna go deep?
Yeah, like win equity, like in terms of like, last week he was at a certain place in terms of his ability to win the game, and now moving forward to this week, is he up or is he down?
Is he one step closer or farther away?
Yes.
Okay. I really, really think that, and maybe I'm biased because I have certain opinions about Paul that have carried over from BB18, but I really do think that the way that he is speaking to and about his allies, or the people who think that think that they are his allies, is going to come back to bite him. He is getting so confident. The language that he is using, saying like, "Oh, Elena and Mark, they're just like our bitch. Like they'll go wherever the numbers go." Like all this stuff is really, eventually people are going to talk to each other, especially after this blindside with Mark and Elena, and hopefully they can link up with Cody and Jessica and realize that they are on the same side, being in the dark here. I think that he's okay for maybe a little while longer, while maybe Mark is in the line of fire, someone like that. But I really do think that he has made mistakes this week that are going to catch up with him.
Liana, what do you think?
I don't necessarily agree with that. I mean, I think that Paul, watching him interact with different people, he has been able to build really solid connections. Christmas trusts him immensely. Jason trusts him. Kevin somewhat, so that Jason-Kevin thing could be a problem. Alex is following him around. Matt did say that he wants to play with Paul in the game. And so I think that there are solid connections that Paul has built. I think that that's going to help. I think what he's been able to successfully do is turn the house against Jessica and against Cody. And I think that even though there's this blindside happening against them, it doesn't matter because Paul is still going to be okay. I mean, the only concern is, yes, let's say that Cody ends up winning HOH and Paul, he comes to his senses and does decide to go after Paul, which he has mentioned having an interest in, and obviously took a shot at him the first time. I think that he still has the votes in order to stay in the house.
John, are you in agreement there?
Yeah, so if we're going to say, buy or sell, like from this time last week, is he in a better or worse place? I would say that he's actually in a worse place. I don't believe that, I'm not going to go full Lita and say that he's like in trouble, but I'm not going to go full Liana and say that he's in a great spot either. I don't think he's going to go for several weeks. Probably. I think that he's definitely going to make jury, but I would say that if from this time last week, we've got Cody back in the house, and now Cody has made him a named target, and he's setting himself up to sort of indirectly backstab Elena and Mark. And I think that this might be sort of the beginning of the end. There's also that halting hex. There have been rumors inside and outside the house of a double eviction coming up on the horizon. So I would say from this time last week, where is that radar? And I would say that he's lower than he was before.
I have to say I'm in agreement with that. I do think that I have been impressed with Paul's game this week. I like that he is no longer immune and he was able to dodge this bullet. But the fact that there was a bullet to dodge in the first place is not good for him. Cody re-entering the game was a huge upset for Paul. And the fact that Cody is not only back in the house, but Jessica has the halting hex and was HOH this week, it's still a lot for him to conquer. And he was able to get past the first step, but coming from last week where he was in basically total control to this week where he was able to slide by for sure and able to take out one of his top targets, which is, again, impressive by Paul, but he's still behind in terms of where he was last week. Mm-hmm. So I'm not super optimistic about Paul's ability moving forward. He's in a lot of trouble with somebody like Cody, who's very good at competitions. If Cody wins that HOH, it's hard to see how Paul wiggles his way out of that. We do need to look at votes in terms of, is there somebody that he can be put up against that he would go home with? But you never know. Things always change when somebody's on the block. I think it would be difficult to get him out, but once somebody's on the block, it's like things start to come out. And if secrets start to get revealed, if people start to talk because he's on the block, then we could easily see Paul leaving as early as next week. So
It's like the Emperor's New Clothes. Like once people see him on the block, that'll change their perception of whether or not they could vote him out.
I mean, possibly. I can't help but think that he is a vet playing in this game with newbies and again, Big Brother is a long game. It's a marathon, and absolutely things can change from week to week, and who knows. But the strength of the bonds that he's built with people, I mean, unless a lot of stuff comes out of the woodwork, I think that Paul is going to be able to maintain those bonds. People are still going to feel loyal to him and still feel the need to keep him, and that could help him dodge a bullet, next week.
All right, so that's where we stand on Paul. Let's move on to Josh, who is in an interesting position here. He was targeted by Jessica and Cody, but it looks like he will survive this week. Moving forward, what do you think of his game prospects, Liana?
Oh my gosh, Josh. He's such a beta baby. He's adorable. So like crying all the time. No, maybe that's Mark. Anyway, I think that Josh is actually in a really good spot because I think Paul and he wants to keep him around. Paul has said that he's willing to take out Christmas before Josh. And then I think once this blindside happens, again, unless we have the Insanity is doing the same thing over and over again from Jess and Cody, I could see them targeting Paul over Josh, and Josh is able to somehow, I mean, he's not very quiet, so I don't know how he'll be able to do this, but slide into the background and maybe lay low.
Yeah, I think this is a great spot for Josh. The fact that he was targeted but is going to stay. The problem is he is going to go after Cody and Jess and Mark in his speech, and I feel like if anything, it's his feud with Mark that's really going to hurt him down the line, because I think Mark will always hold a grudge against Josh more than anybody else. However, I do see Josh lasting quite a while because he is such a wild card, and who's going to want to take the shot at Josh when there's so many juicier targets in the house? It was a rarity that Jess and Cody decided to do this in the first place. The fact that he's going to survive and he's going to continue to be this just like waste of an HOH, basically. I can see Josh moving forward for a little while. In terms of win equity, I don't know. I don't know if Josh can win this game, but I do think he's better off this week than he was last week, Lita.
Yeah, you don't think if it's Josh and Cody at the end that he's got a shot? Oh my God, I would love to see
I think Cody would win in that situation pretty unanimously.
Yeah, well, I'm just really hoping that when he does his speech, he does the whole Tom Cruise, jumping on the couch, like when Tom Cruise is on Oprah and yelling and screaming. Oh, it's going to be wonderful.
Except instead of saying that he was in love, he's in hate with Cody and Jessica. Well, I think that there's a thing that is very real in these shows where you can be under the radar by no one paying attention to you, but you can also kind of be so on the radar and so loud and so annoying to everybody that you loop back around. And like you said, Taran, that it would be a waste of an HOH because he's just someone that anybody can get rid of at any time. There's just always going to be bigger fish to fry because he's so annoying. And it's just a matter of can he get to the point where he is annoying so much, he's making people so pissed that people just are all right, we're done with this. Let's just do this at final 7 or 6 or whatever. But I think he can keep it under control. I think that he has demonstrated self-awareness talking to the feed saying okay, at a certain point, I need to chill, that he's going to be fine for the weeks going forward.
I think that, actually, Josh is executing the new version of the Dr. Will Kirby strategy of the target is too big. So now the mouthpiece is too big. So everybody forgets about him.
Yeah, the thing about Josh and his self-awareness is that very much in the same way that he's attacking people and then crying when he gets attacked. It's he goes off and goes crazy. And then he's okay, I'm sorry. I messed up. I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm going to lie low. And then he goes off and he's crazy and he throws condiments at people. And then he's oh my God, I'm so sorry. I messed up. I'm not going to do that anymore. I don't think we're ever going to see a stable Josh in that house, John.
It's because his self-awareness is not paired with self-control. And I think that currently, as well as for the rest of the game, Josh's biggest enemy will be himself. He wouldn't have gone on the block this week if he hadn't done what he did during the HOH ceremony, or HOH competition. And I think that it just takes the right person who acts rashly at the wrong moment. How many times is he going to piss off the HOH right before nominations? Or how many times is he going to say the wrong thing, before eviction night or whatever? I think when and if he does eventually go, it will just be his own doing, because that even though he knows maybe what he's supposed to do with self-awareness, he doesn't have any self-control at all.
Well, he said he's not a bully, but I'll bully the bully. So I don't know if that's like the definition of not having self-awareness or understanding, but Josh exemplifies that.
Yeah.
It's like the Watchmen, who bullies the bullies. So let's move on to Cody. I think pretty self-evident that Cody's in a better spot this week than he was last week, right?
Yes.
Yeah, sitting in sequester in the Ramada Inn versus actually in the house. I think that this is a step up.
Higher win equity.
You haven't seen their breakfast buffet.
Yeah, they have a lot of pickled eggs and Mountain Dew.
But do they have cereal? That's the real question.
Oh, Matt'll be so disappointed.
Yeah. That's why he wants to make jury.
It's like that's the only place they have cereal.
I heard there's a land in jury.
It's just the land of milk and cereal.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Instead of buying Matt, I think I'll buy like Post or General Mills or Kellogg's or something like that. But Cody, I mean, yeah. Oh, Cody. Cody's obviously in a better spot, but you know, considering where he started,
yeah,
I don't think that's saying much.
Yeah, not the best position to be in. I think the halting hex is his saving grace, but without the halting hex, I think that he would most likely be gone next week in a very similar display to what happened in week 2, right, Lita?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, the halting hex can't be used for both Jess and Cody. So, you know, we're talking about Jess and Cody getting through to the next week as if it's guaranteed because of this, but it's still possible that they both go up on the block. Like, a lot of time.
Stops the eviction entirely.
Right. Yes. Yeah, sorry. Totally. I honestly, people have been comparing it to the hidden immunity idol so much that I've just like, that's like what it is in my brain. No, you're totally right. Okay. But still, it can only be used for 1 week. Like, I'm absolutely not buying Cody. I'm buying Cody as compared to last week, Cody, for sure. I'm with you on that meatball train, but not on, not on his win equity.
How dare you, Lita? He has excellent breeding skills, which is literally a phrase that he has uttered.
That's the creepiest thing I've ever heard.
Ollie was bred for this, so maybe there's like a secret relief.
Cornbread for this.
Cornbread for this.
Secret parenting right there. Cody is actually Polly's father.
Oh my gosh, the Food Alliance.
Yeah, there it is. I don't think we're ever going to see a win. Like Big Brother OTT notwithstanding, like when you have week 1 sort of 2 sides or 2 people who represent 2 sides of the house that are going to be going against each other, like you're not going to see that person win. Like Cody, he's not going to win because he's the face of that side of the house. He's the face of Jessica and Cody. He's the one who's going to be doing the action for whoever ends up on that side of the house at any given time. So it's just a matter of time. Like he's the target that you target when you decide to target a target.
What an unemotional face he would be.
Yeah.
This podcast sponsored by Target.
Yeah.
Yes. So moving on to Jessica, I feel like Cody cannot win this game, but I do think Jessica can because as Jon mentioned, Cody will always go first and he will be the buffer to protect Jessica. And I do think that Jessica, once Cody leaves again, will have the opportunity to blend back in yet again and potentially get down the road. And the fact that she has the halting hex, that she's been making some moves, I do think it will earn her some respect when it comes to the final 2. Jon, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, whether we're talking about winning potential, I do think that she's shown a little bit of aptitude. We did see an improvement from when Cody was in the house the first time and then when he was gone. Sadly, she's kind of gone back a little bit, like literally gone back to sort of, just kind of cuddling with him all day. But if Cody goes again, I think that we could see a similar improvement. I think that, yeah, like you're saying, the halting hex, that's good sort of jury resume building type stuff. And then just in the short term, like she's definitely not going to go in the next few weeks because of this halting hex thing. So, she's pretty much guaranteed to make jury at this point. And depending on who's left when that happens, I think that there is a path to the end for her. To go back to what I was saying about, is she in a better spot than she was exactly 1 week ago today? I might say no again because Cody coming back in hurts her. And then I think that this HOH is going to really be a failure for what she wanted.
Cody coming back in was just, I think, bad for her game. And I think one of my other concerns for her is that she's going to be willing to use the halting hex to save him, because like we said, Cody is going to be the first to go if it's Cody and Jess on the block. And I almost want her, I know this isn't going to happen, this is just wishful thinking, but if she could not use it, let Cody go home and then be able to reintegrate and then still have the halting hex in her back pocket, like that would be absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, right.
I know. A girl can dream, can't she?
It does expire. I think it's got a 4-week expiration on it too.
Right. So this is the second week, right? So then she has
Yeah.
2 more weeks after that. So if she ends up going on the block that week, then she would still be able to use it the week after. But oh my gosh, she's only told Cody, right, about the halting hex. She hasn't told anybody else at this point.
She's talked about dropping hints that she has a power that will render an HOH useless. Like, she doesn't want to say what it is, and she hasn't done it yet, but she has mentioned the intention to kind of start hinting to other people, like, you better be careful. You wouldn't want to just waste your whole HOH.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Thing about Jessica for me is that I think she's completely misplayed this week. I think that Cody coming back into the game has demolished her social game yet again. However, the fact that she has this halting hex is so powerful, and getting Cody back as an ally, who's somebody who's really good at HOH competitions, I think it's actually a net positive for her when it comes down to it. You know, I do think that she should use the halting hex to save Cody. She only has 2 more weeks anyway, and Cody is basically a halting hex in front of her. He's never going to pull himself off instead of her. He's never going to, he's going to take the bullet for her no matter what. So she basically has at least 2 weeks of safety after this, which is 2 chances for Cody to win an HOH and take a shot at somebody for her. I think that, again, despite the fact that she's completely misplayed this week, she'd be in a way better spot if she was actually playing correctly and taking out an actual target like Josh or Paul. But even though she isn't, I still do think that she's on the rise from where she was before. Even though she was doing better as an actual player, I think the twists have really, really benefited her and will continue to benefit her over the next few weeks. So I'm actually kind of thinking I think her chances have improved, and I'm kind of buying Jessica right now. Like terrible play, but I think her chances to win have gone up. Lita, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I agree with Liana that Cody coming back into the game is bad for her, at least for this week and for the next couple weeks, because she undid all of the work that she did reintegrating herself into the house. But it's almost like a reset for her, where the whole thing can happen again, but 2 weeks later, where Cody goes out and then she's an underdog again and she can re-ingratiate herself. So I think that this definitely bought her a little bit more time. At the same time, I picked her as my winner preseason, so she's going out like next week.
Yeah, same.
For sure. Yeah.
Well, I think
I have never been correct. So
I think my biggest concern, like I totally understand what you're saying, but I think for me, you know, social relationships are just so freaking important. And to see her just like trash any social relationships that she's built, she's isolated herself. Once this flip happens, I can't imagine she's going to then reintegrate. So, I mean, it is entirely possible that once she's able to maybe skip these next 2 weeks, she's able to do it to reintegrate herself. But I almost feel like the damage could be done at that point. Instead of she becomes a free agent, you know, Cody doesn't come back into the game and she's able to maneuver her way much further. So I don't know. I can see both points of view.
She's also won an HOH now, and it was one that wasn't a total crapshoot, and it was also one that wasn't thrown to her. Like, she legit won like a legitimate, you know, endurance HOH. So, you know, in a pinch, if there's another endurance later on in the season and she thinks she really needs it, I think that she could win out, which could help her get it even farther.
Yeah, I do think that she would probably have to pull a Rachel Riley-esque style of win in order to get there. And I think that, you know, Cody coming back in a very similar way that that Brendan came back is, again, it's a net positive for sure. I do think that that's her out here, whereas before I wasn't sure how she was going to win. Now I kind of see the path. So that's where I'm sort of coming from with Jess. But let's move on to Mark, who the market has crashed on Mark, right, Liana?
Oh my gosh. Yes. Donkey Kong, Wreck-It Ralph. Like, this is a game that has been completely unplugged. Blowing into the cartridge won't even help. I feel like Mark is in such a bad position. Like, not only is he being targeted by, you know, or at least Cody and Jessica are concerned about him. Then of course, there's all the other people on the other side. He's been he was a have-not last week. He's going to be a have-not for 2 more weeks. Everybody is talking about targeting him. I mean, even Christmas and Paul said, you know, this is our opportunity to possibly get out Mark, because he's going to be so angry and so upset, you know, because being on slop, he's going to piss everybody off. So I mean, I would sell Mark hands down.
I'm tilting my head right now because I don't understand why you're saying this about poor Mark. Yeah, I agree. John, what do you think?
Total agreement. He's definitely in the sell category. He's in really big trouble. His alliance is not telling him stuff, and then the other people are against him. And like I said earlier, Elena has hinted that she would be willing to cut him, and that's like kind of the closest person that he has. And then obviously, let's not forget that Dominique went last week, which was sort of his other number one. So I really do think that Mark is the obvious person to go next.
Yeah, just real bad gameplay running right back to Cody in the way that he did. He was obviously scared of Cody like the beta that he is, but but you could hear the eye roll from Lita with that. Yeah, it's just he was way too concerned with his relationship with Cody, and it really just trashed his game. Lita, are you with us here? Sell and Mark?
Yeah, I would really love to come in and be like, no, you guys are wrong, just to like have some kind of debate. But it's just I can't even like pretend to have an argument for Mark here. I don't see it. And like poor Mark, he's like a walking like wah wah, because like he just has like everybody in the house is against him. Some people who shouldn't even be against him, and then his girlfriend is rubbing up on Paul all night. It's so sad.
He just wants to make friends and not have to vote them out every week.
I know. And he just wants to like, snuggle with Elena, but she has some other ideas.
Oh, why won't they love him?
I know.
All right, let's move on to Elena. We were pretty high on Elena last week. She was in a pretty good spot, but kind of in a weird situation. She's been put on the outs out of nowhere. She seemed ingrained with everybody, she seemed like in the middle of everything, and now all of a sudden she's on the outside looking in. Jon, how do you feel about Elena right now?
You know what? I am going to go against what you implied there. I think that Elena's actually in a pretty good spot. Like, it is true that she's not getting all of the information that she needs, and she's definitely got a bad read on the house this week. But right now, she is the most trusted person of the current HOH, right? Like, Jessica's the one asking Elena for advice, which means that she's kind of in a good spot with her and Cody. I think that similar to Cody leaving helping Jessica, I think when Mark goes, that will also help Elena, because they're still perceived as a duo in the house, even if they aren't super, super close anymore. And so she could be seen as a loose thread. And then I also think that Paul is taking her for granted. But I think that if he burns her and then she is much more upset than this is going to sound confusing. When Paul burns Elena, if she's more upset than Paul predicts that she will be, I think that Paul may backpedal a little bit on that. So I don't see Elena going home anytime soon. I think that if Mark does end up going, I think that when Ramses goes this week, that it's going to help Elena seem like sort of a victim, and she might be perceived as someone who can be picked up. And then I think if Mark goes next, she's going to seem just like a good number to snatch up.
As long as she doesn't make any noises, then that's key.
Right. Silent victim. Okay.
I think, I definitely get what both of you are saying. I think that in this immediate isolated week, it looks like she's in a bad position. But I think long-term, this actually is okay for her, because no matter what the fallout of this week is going to be, I don't see her really in the crosshairs, because, yes, Paul may backpedal, but also Elena still is siding with Cody and Jess and wouldn't end up being a target for them. So ultimately, long term, I think she's in a good spot, but I can see that in this week, there's concern about her.
Lita, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm for sure in on Elena. I'm with Jon here. I really feel like once that Mark will be the meatball shield for her, and then she will just, I think it'll be like where Jess was after Cody went out, except that Elena doesn't have to build these relationships from scratch. She already has some, and people like her, and she hasn't lied to anyone, and she's not going to get caught in any kind of jams a la Kevin a couple weeks ago. Like, I don't see where the target on her is coming from at this point. For the next week.
Jam, that's another food that we can tell people.
Breakfast foods.
Yes, we should call this the Breakfast Club group.
The Breakfast Club.
Hey!
All right, maybe that could be our hashtag. I'm with you guys on Elena. I think that long term she's still good. The problem for me is this is kind of a little blip on the radar in terms of she was totally fine, but I can see a situation where she just by a fluke goes home next week, because basically if Jessica and Cody play this correctly, they're not going to see the block, because people are going to be like, well, we can't nominate Jessica and Cody. They have the power to stop the eviction from happening if that happens. And so the backup plan right now is put up Mark and Josh, or Mark and Elena. And if Mark ends up winning the veto and takes himself down, I can see Elena going instead of him. I think that there will be a discussion. Should it be Josh or should it be Elena? And Elena might take that hit, whereas last week, she was never in that situation to begin with at all. But I don't think that's going to happen. I think Elena's probably going to stay safe. And if she does stay safe next week, which I think is the only week she'll be anywhere near any danger, then I do think she'll be very good moving forward. But in terms of where she was last week to this week, I do think it has fallen just a little bit. There's just a little bit of danger ahead of her where previously there had been none. So I'm not selling by any means, but I'm not ready to buy anymore right now because I'm just a little bit worried.
But is it incredibly wishful thinking to think if she was on the block with Mark, that Mark would save her? Is that crazy? I don't know.
I don't think he would.
I think that she has some faculties about her that could make it a possibility.
I think Mark would cry a lot. Like, he's definitely got a lot of tears this season, but he came into the house wanting to play, and he's done a lot of bad moves lately, and I do think his game is coming to an end. But I don't think that he's so head over heels in love with Elena that he was.
No, I don't think so either. I'm just saying it's something that Elena, I think, has very, very good social skills, and it's not. And Mark doesn't. I think if Mark was defeated enough and has been beat down enough over the past couple weeks that he doesn't think that he could go much further anyway. I'm just throwing it out there as not the least realistic thing.
Well, did you see the way that Mark was looking at Elena earlier in the bathroom, just so intensely? Although I guess that's how he also stared at Big Jeff when he was doing his interview. So maybe that doesn't actually mean anything.
That's how he stares at everyone. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
I feel like Elena is not even the kind of person that I think would even try to get Mark to use the veto on her. I feel like even if he was like, oh, maybe I'll use the veto, she's the kind of person that'd be like, no, don't do that. That's not what I want to happen.
I don't know about that, but
all right. Let's move on to Matt. He is in this situation where he's kind of torn. Should I go with this plan with Paul, or should I maybe stick with Cody and Jess and what they want? Ultimately, we do think he's going to side with Paul, but what does that mean for his game, Lita?
I think that Matt is okay for a little while. And I think the reason that I say that is that I think it's a good sign that he was the one to kind of bring up to Paul all of the problems with his plan, but it didn't make Paul not trust him. I think that Paul is the kind of person where if there's any sort of any signal of counterinsurgents against him, he might get paranoid and go talk to people about how he's pissed at Mark or Matt or whatever. But I think the fact that he didn't seem super put off by that is a good sign that he really is in a real legit alliance with Matt and is fine with that. And I think that Matt's going to be fine for a little while.
Do you agree, Jon?
Yeah, I would say that I think that we're going to upgrade Matt to don't buy. He's definitely somebody that is not really playing the game the way that we really can observe it. We talked about him a lot earlier on, but I don't think that he's in any trouble anytime soon. And honestly, I think getting a bit of a scare or a kick in the pants or a little bit of a blind side or being on the wrong side of the vote or something, that can only wake him up and get him to be a little bit more invested. But we're not going to be talking about Matt going home anytime soon.
I mean, I think what is so frustrating about Matt is that if you think about it, he is actually playing a good game by just kind of going to sleep and not being on anybody's radar and just being so extraordinarily average that no one wants to target him in any way. I don't think he knows what he's doing, and I don't think that he quite realizes it. So my concern is well, yes, I still think he's in a really good position. I worry that if he does actually wake up and try to play, then he's going to do it poorly, and it's actually going to end up damaging his game. Whereas he really should have just stayed, focus on the breakfast cereal, wear your 2 shirts, and make it to Final 5.
Yeah, and I think being attached to Raven is always going to be a disadvantage for him because he's always going to go before her, which is just not... I mean, granted, Raven is tossed around as a pawn all the time, and if she actually goes up as a pawn, I could see her going home that way because people would be like, well, she's used as a pawn because nobody would vote for her. But that means she's a threat. So maybe we should vote for her. That said, usually you don't want to be the big strapping, alarming dude in a showmance because that's not the greatest spot to be in terms of who's going to be targeted. And I'm kind of with Jon here in terms of it's maybe just like a don't buy. I'm not quite selling any further than I would already had been. But it's still hard to picture Matt winning the game and getting all the way to the end. Right, Liana?
Yeah, I mean, that's what I'm saying. Like, okay, so let's say he does start to play and he's bad at it. Like, even if he didn't play, he's only going to make final five. Like, I don't see him then, once he gets close enough, unless he's able to turn it on, he's not going to end up winning the game. So will he go far? Yes, I do think that's a definite possibility. But will he win? Not really.
All right, let's move on to Raven. How do we feel about Raven? Let's start with you, Liana.
Oh, she's the healthiest sick girl I've ever seen.
Yeah.
I just love it when Kevin was like, oh, I think Raven should be on The Amazing Race. She just looks so healthy. It's just constantly digging into her.
Kevin's on to her.
Yeah, Kevin's on. Well, oh my gosh. So it's so hard for me to give a really objective answer about Raven because she annoys me so greatly. She pulled that whole, oh, my biggest flaw is that I'm nice to everybody. And you're allowed to be passive aggressive if it's at Starbucks. You go, oh my gosh, this girl says these things. It is driving me insane. Now, that being said, how does she fit into the game? What is her position? I think that there are people who are starting to be annoyed by her. Kevin, for sure. I know that Jess and Cody have talked about seeing her as a player and not just as this charity case, because Cody has said before, you know, I want Raven to win this game. She deserves it. She needs it. So I think people in the house are starting to turn around on her and to recognize that, okay, we're not just going to give her the money. So I think that that's a negative in her favor. But I think she's at the same place. I think she's at a don't buy. But I'm not willing to sell her yet, but I don't see her winning in the end now.
Lita, do you agree?
Yeah, to an extent. But I do think that being seen as a player is probably better than being seen as a charity case, because at a certain point, people are going to say, oh, crap, every single person is going to vote for her. And being kind of annoying, I think actually helps her a little bit, because it doesn't make her such an automatic, oh, I don't want to go to the end with her. I agree with Liana in my personal assessment of her, except that I think like she's the worst, but she's also like kind of the best, because I just like can't believe some of the things that come out of her mouth, and that makes me laugh. But in terms of actual strategy, it's so hard to see where she fits in, right? Because there are these people who still think of her as you know, if not a victim, at least someone who has gone through this really terrible situation. Then there's some people who are really irritated by her. And we just don't see her a lot. We don't get her perspective, except like, we're going to go with Paul. So I'm with Liana in that I'm just holding this week, because I have a really hard time foreseeing where Raven is going in the next couple weeks.
Isn't it true though, Lita, that you're biased because you also got a GPA in dance?
My GPA is in dance. So she is one of my peers.
Oh my gosh, did you guys see that Matt Hoffman checked the Mensa registry and did not find either her or her mom?
Wow.
Oh my gosh, there was also the other controversy. Did you hear that apparently Raven's mother was leaking fans' addresses and phone numbers?
She's been doxing people.
Yeah, she's been doxing people. Isn't that crazy?
I don't know if we want to talk about it. I don't think we should talk about it.
There was a question that was like, how do I avoid being doxxed? And my answer, which I didn't actually say, was don't talk about it on a podcast, probably is our best bet to not be doxxed. So,
hey, I just said Raven was kind of the best. So Mrs. Raven's mother, please do not dox me.
John, how do you feel about Raven?
So I want to approach this from a slightly different angle. I want to come at it from like a historical perspective, because we've seen people with, whether you want to call them disabilities or what, come on shows like this before. We've had a lot of people on Survivor who've been deaf and have been missing limbs, and outside of Eddie McGee, who doesn't count for obvious reasons, we've never seen this person win. They've always been seen as a liability early on, because when in something like Survivor, they're a liability in team challenges, and then they might float by in the middle for a little while because of that whole story thing. But it's never ever gotten anyone to the end, and it's never gotten anyone a win, because no one wants to sit next to that in the end. And it's all well and good when there's still 60 plus days left of the game to say nice things about a nice person and you want someone to do well. But when it's like, boy, I'm only 5 votes away from winning $500,000, no one is going to keep that. The closest I think that we've ever really come with someone like having some sort of a sob story or something like that is Adam Klein in Survivor Millennials Gen X. But that was, I think, a completely different set of circumstances, and he played a very different style of game. And whether or not you want to call anything post-game canon or not, you know, people have said that he was probably going to win whether or not he revealed the story of his mother. So I think if we look at the precedent of these reality competition shows, it's every single season that someone like this is on there. It's always a discussion, but no one ever lets it happen. It's never, ever happened that anyone's even gotten close to the end. Like Final Six is the best that this archetype, if you want to generalize to that point, has ever done.
Yeah, I agree. I think Raven is in a similar spot to Matt, where it is just kind of like, she hasn't like gone down from last week necessarily, but I don't think anybody's ready to buy Raven quite yet. So let's move on to Christmas. How is Christmas doing, Liana?
Oh, it's always Christmas season. No, Christmas is in an interesting position because she has built a strong relationship with Paul, yet Paul is still, willing to cut her before other people. She has this, set up to do this sympathy vote where she's going to vote. I mean, well, though they're all going to vote to keep Josh. And it seems like she is building relationships with a lot of different people, but all of those relationships are strained in some way. And so I think that this puts her in a little bit of a precarious position. But I do think that she is not in danger of going anytime soon. I mean, I think that she would be a target far down the road. So I actually feel good about Christmas, and I would buy Christmas.
Lita, do you agree?
Presents.
Yeah, I wish that I was out on Christmas so that I could make a joke about being a Jew and not celebrating Christmas. But I am celebrating Christmas this week. I'm buying on Christmas as well. I feel like I mentioned earlier, I think that her talking about the sympathy vote with Josh is going to make Jessica and Josh not as mad at her. And that's just my perspective on the situation. And I think that she's still in with the Paul and co because she's voting with them. I just really don't see who's coming for her in the coming weeks.
John, do you see anyone coming for her?
I'm going to be the dissenting vote here. I think that it's not Christmas time yet, but I think that the holiday season is on the horizon. Maybe it's Black Friday because she has the broken foot thing going on. So I think that puts her a little bit in the same position as Raven, where I'm saying that if no one wants to sit next to her in the end for that reason, I think that while it's still pretty much an alliance heavy aspect of the game, she's not bringing anything to the competitions. Like if her, not to go full Dominique, but if her team needs her to pull out a win, it's probably not going to happen. And then I think that this whole throw a sympathy vote to Josh thing, I came up with a way in my own brain that it kind of makes sense in her head. But depending on how this falls out, it might be seen like she was trying to hedge her bets. So it may be seen as Jessica and Cody might be like, oh, you knew and you didn't vote with us. And then from the other side of the house, it might be like, oh, you were trying to, if people catch wind that she was talking about throwing these sympathy votes. And Liana, you brought it up earlier, people have already talked about her being a target. So it's not like she's not on anyone's radar either. So next week, no, maybe not. But I don't think that she's going to make it too terribly much farther. She's on enough.
Well, it's actually interesting because thinking about Christmas in the sense of competitions, right? Like she had to still dress up, but was unable to participate in that veto competition. But she came in second in the HOH that was just played. And so it's very weird to think about maybe when she can play, she's going to be a comp threat, but the percentage of time that's going to happen is 50%. And so how people are going to actually interpret that and think about, well, is she a threat? Is she not a threat? Is she a benefit? Is she not a benefit? I don't quite know how everybody is going to think about that in the context of her as a benefit or detriment to their game.
We're getting to the point of the year too, where the predictable challenges are coming up. They're going to know, and they've been talking in the house, the slip and slide challenge, that's going to be coming up soon. She definitely won't be able to do that. I know this is a veto, but the OTEV challenge, that'll be coming up kind of soon. She won't be able to do that. So, we're getting to that point in the year where they kind of are going to start knowing some of the comps that are coming too.
Yeah, Christmas is in this weird spot where she just doesn't have a lot of close allies, and she's still on people's radar. She really hasn't moved anywhere from last week, in my perspective, from my perspective. So I'm holding on whatever I had with Christmas. I feel like she hasn't quite moved up, but she hasn't really done anything to improve her situation either, at least from my perspective. But let's move on to who's next? Alex. Let's talk about Alex, because Alex and Jason, both in particular, I feel like this is a great spot for them. It's in a similar way to where Paul managed to squeak out a bit of safety here. The fact that Alex wasn't targeted by Jessica, who hates her, I think is very good for her. And moving forward after this vote flip, I feel like it could be a good spot for her to be in. John, what do you think?
Yeah, a lot of people were saying this time last week that her HOH was kind of going disastrously. She had originally had all of her plans, and then her plans kind of changed, and she made a lot of people mad. And so we could have seen it play out this week that she definitely was a target. Like, yeah, Jessica won the HOH after she'd been on the block underneath Alex. So I think that Alex has, I would agree, definitely gotten herself a modicum of safety in a way that I'm kind of surprised that she's done. And for the time being, she's still aligned with Paul, which at least for the time being is a pretty good place to be. It's like we were talking about earlier with like, you don't want to be number 1 or number 2. She's kind of like in that number 3, maybe number 4 spot in the Paul alliance. So it's a good spot to be in.
I think that you're surprised that she put herself in this position because she didn't put herself in this position. I mean, I completely agree that she's like, this is great for her, but that was not to her doing. I mean, I don't think, her and Jason are not good game players, but they are in a fantastic position because of all of the moving parts around them, not because of them necessarily.
Yeah, I think I think Cody coming back was a huge benefit to Alex in particular, and it's looking very good for them as far as what I can see, John.
Yeah, no, I was going to say it's kind of like Forrest Gump or something. Like they happen to be in the right place at the right time, and they really don't understand why it's working out for them. And if they actually try to make it work out for them, they're not going to do a good job of it. But as long as they can just kind of keep riding that ride, then they're in a good spot.
Lita, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, she managed to come out of her HOH totally scot-free, as far as I can tell, and she's maintained these allies. I think where I'm concerned for Alex is that she really has put a lot of stock in this partnership that she has with Paul, and I think that that's not a totally mutual partnership, and I think that she needs to kind of take stock of where she actually is in this Paul and Co alliance, because she's under the impression that like, oh, it's her and Paul and they're equals and they're running the house, and that's not what is actually going on from Paul's perspective and from the reality of what's going on in the house. So I hope that she is able to kind of assess better where she actually is. But for now, yeah, I'm buying on Alex for sure.
Yeah, Alex is still saying that Paul can't lie because of friendship.
Right,
and it's like, you are a part of a plan where you are lying to Cody and Jessica about this vote. You plan on blindsiding them. Paul is orchestrating it. He is the number 1 liar on board with this plan, and you're saying he can't lie because of friendship? He's lying. He's lying for you, but that doesn't mean he's not lying, right? Like, come on, Alex.
Friendship.
This happens in real life all the time, though, and not to cut her some slack or whatever, but people are really bad judges of character and motives and all that stuff when it's too close to them. We're really good at judging intentions and motives of other people. We're really good at judging other people. We're not really good at judging ourselves. And so, Alex can look at someone like Ramses and be like, wow, what a dummy. He can't see that he's being blindsided, or he can't see that he's being lied to by the friendship. But it's different for her because she's in it,
I mean, that's part of the reason why Ramses didn't want to see all of the signs that were in front of him, because, he didn't want to believe the truth in front of him.
It's a thing that we say all the time.
Yeah, exactly. But how dare you judge somebody for eating pickled eggs and Mountain Dew?
Because I would never be me.
Someday, John. Let's talk about Jason. Whistlenut. We were pretty high on Whistlenut last week. He seemed like the voice of reason to Alex, but this week he's been running his mouth a little bit. Liana, what do you think about Jason's game?
So Jason told Cody that he voted for Christmas to stay, which is not what Cody believed. And then when Cody goes up to talk to Jessica, Jessica says, why would he admit that to you? And then Cody just calls Whistlenut an idiot. I mean, this is quintessential Whistlenut. And I think that he does so many things that sometimes it can seem that he's playing a good game. And don't get me wrong, he is entertaining as all get out. He was telling this story the other day about how he met up with Georgia O'Keeffe's butler when he was riding a horse. And then the butler wanted to take a video of him riding bareback, which he thought obviously meant without a saddle, riding bareback. But the butler meant naked. And so it's very bizarre, right? So these are the stories that I'm hearing from Whistlenut, which I absolutely love. So I want him to stay in this game, talk more about his pet squirrel named Clutch. But when it comes to his actual game sense, I mean, he's just an erratic mess. So yes, I think he's in a good position, but I just have such a hard time like believing in him as a player and believing in him as a possible winner because he's so erratic in his gameplay.
Can I just say, I saw somebody in the chat, Jimmy Boy in the chat said, sell whistle butt. Oh, nut. Stupid spell check.
Because Whistle Butt is a much more goofy and like offensive and ridiculous name than Whistle Nut.
Yeah. I think I agree with you, Liana. I think that again, Jason has good instincts, kind of good instincts in the game as far as like skepticism, a natural skepticism that I think is going to serve him well moving forward, especially with Paul in the house. But he just talks too much, and he doesn't have the demeanor of a winner of Big Brother. So it's hard to see him winning the game. I do think Alex probably has a better shot there than he does, and I think maybe we're a little too quick to say that he was the voice of reason just because he was right that week, because he's not always right. I think it's very situational. I think that he just takes the skeptical role on everything, and so when that happens to be right, it's like a broken clock. It is occasionally right? So what do you think, Liana or Lita?
I knew it was going to happen at some point. I am just really hung up on the idea that in the same minute, I have heard Jason is the voice of reason and Whistlenut and Georgia O'Keeffe in the same sentence. There's just really so much to process here. I really never expected that. But I mean, yeah, I think that he's someone like Alex who's in a good position for now. But unlike Alex, I think that he is unable to control his filter. And I agree with this idea that he just runs his mouth too much. And I think that's going to be his downfall. But I do see him okay for the next couple weeks.
Oh, it's so funny because Alex is the person who has been making a lot of mistakes. I mean, she was the one that revealed to Ramses that, he was going to be going home because Josh was going to stay. But Kevin, when they were trying to study days, Alex and Kevin, or Jason, Kevin and Alex were all trying to study days. Jason was like, oh, I don't want to do this. Like, this is irrelevant. And Alex is the one who's like, no, we need to do this. And so that's why, even though they're both so bad, and I thought Alex was worse, she might be better because she's actually willing to put in some of the work, whereas Jason is just absolutely insane. Entertaining, but insane.
I trust Alex to at least understand the mechanics of the game far better, and that makes me have more faith in her longevity in the game.
The only mechanics that Whistlenut understands is when it's a mechanical bull.
Oh my God.
He was telling a story this morning about how, I don't know if you guys caught this, there was like a stray dog that wandered into his barn. And so he like captured it and decided that he was going to make it mate with like his personal dog. And so like, and then like the owner of that dog called and like, then he was like, you have my dog. And then he was like, no, I found this dog. It's my dog now. Like, it ended up all right, but I think he ended up profiting off it. Like he sold a man his own dog back for like $50. So his stories definitely are entertaining, if not a little bit disconcerting sometimes.
I'm selling Whistlenut forever now.
There it is. There we go. I just flipped you. No, but I don't think any dogs were like abused necessarily. Like they
just forced to bred and then sold back to their own owner. No, that's not abuse.
They were bred for this.
They were bred for this. But either way, no, I think that him and Alex are kind of in like a showmance situation where they're not actually a showmance, but they're kind of perceived that way in the house. Where I think when their number's up, I think he'll go before Alex does.
All right, let's move on finally to Kevin, who personally I feel like Kevin is in a much better spot than he was last week, where you're starting to get caught by Alex and Jason, but they don't really seem to care anymore about those hinky votes. It's in the past. They've got bigger things to deal with than Kevin and hinky votes. So I'm really liking Kevin's spot. Lita, do you agree?
Yeah, certainly compared to last week, he's in a better spot. And this is what I think a lot of people were saying on the feed updates is that, like, yeah, he's kind of getting stuck, but also he has this personality where people, like, can just let it go in a way that they might not be able to with someone who isn't so charming and so non-threatening, honestly. And I think it's to his benefit that he went out in like 2 seconds in the comp. Like, I just don't see him becoming a target. I think that he has these tendencies to overshare and to get caught. And I think that is going to catch up with him at some point. Not to give a total fancy answers on like so many of these people, but I really think that at least compared to last week, for sure, I'm buying.
Jon, what do you think?
I think that Kevin is continuing to be underestimated in the house. And even though he's kind of the fan favorite of the season, I'm going to go so far as to say that a lot of the fans watching are still underestimating him too. He doesn't know the game as well as a lot of the other players, but he's a very fast learner. He's the oldest person in the house, which means he has the most life experience. And I think he's shown to have a pretty good memory and a pretty good, he's a quick learner. He tells these stories about like different careers and jobs that he's had, and like he used to be a bookie or whatever. Like, I think he's got a good head for numbers. I think that we could see him doing very well later on in the season when there are challenges related to like, what day did this happen on, or did this happen before this or after this? And what he lacks.
If he's willing to study, I think.
Yeah, but it was Jason who didn't want to study in that conversation. I think that Kevin could do well, and I don't even know how much he needs to study. And I think he is in a good spot socially. I don't think anyone's targeting him anytime soon. I think that the closest he's come this entire game was last week, but by having Cody come back on the house, that's completely thrown him off the radar. He's my favorite this season, hands down. So maybe I'm a little bit biased, but I do think that he's in a really, really, really good spot. And when it was preseason, we joked like, Kevin is going to be the winner of the season, but I think that you could easily see him being one of the viable winners at this point.
I completely co-sign. I mean, Kevin is... I love Kevin. And again, just from both a personal standpoint and also a game point, from a game perspective, he is playing so well. I have never heard his name come out of anybody's lips as far as a target from anyone. So I think that bodes well absolutely for him. I would buy Kevin, much like Kevin buys Saran Wrap. The only concern that I have for Kevin is he's playing this dangerous game where he continues to go very subtly behind his allies. So the hinky votes telling Ramses that maybe Ramses should go and talk to Jessica. If Ramses had actually bothered to show up and play the game, that could have come back to bite Kevin in the butt. So my one worry is if he continues to do that, it could be a detriment, but it could also be a benefit because, like you said, he's picked up the game really well from the very first day when Paul comes in, and I think he was like, "Who's this?" Or was it Nicole? I can't remember who it was. Yeah, he's got no sense of the game, but he's learning the game mechanics, and he has a really good shot.
There was earlier today, him and Paul were talking about Michelle Meyer, Big Meech, and Paul was like, "Oh my God, Kevin, you should have met Big Meech. Like you would have, like Big Meech would have been crazy around you or whatever." And Kevin was like, "Who's he? Who's Big Meech?" Like he has no idea who any of these people are, but it makes him charming and it makes him seem non-threatening.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's doing the kind of like the anti-Johnny Mac, where Johnny Mac pretended he didn't know anything, even though he knew everything. Kevin literally knows nothing, much like Jon Snow. And yeah, exactly. He's using it to his advantage. So Kevin's great. So good.
Yes, I'm buying Kevin. I feel like this is a great spot for him, and I like his position moving forward. And that's our stock watch. We got through it all. Good job. This is a good stock watch.
Your enthusiasm is really overwhelming.
Yeah, right. Like cool it with the ticker tape. I think we're...
All right, let's get some questions before we wrap this up. From Anthony on Twitter, he says, let's say everyone throws HOH to Josh next week. Who should his nominations be? Liana, do you have any thoughts on this?
Ooh, so as far as who he actually will nominate, he said that he is going to put up Cody and Jessica. Now, whether or not is that the actual best move for him, I think it is, because I think it shows that he is, straightforward. I could also see him maybe targeting Mark, but I think that Josh's best asset is that he doesn't seem like a strategic threat, and that he is, simple and kind of focused in this like just immediate, hatred of Mark, and he's caught up in this. And so I think if he continues along those lines, I think that that's beneficial for his perception long-term in the game.
Yeah, I think just allow himself to be used as a weapon against the people that are coming for him anyway. I think that's a good spot for him. I think people will recognize that he's being used, and they're not going to target him as this like colossal threat by any means. So I think I agree. I think Jess and Cody would be great nominations for him. We have another question from Peter, who asks, "Who's the favorite to win this season?" John, what do you think?
Well, like I said, Kevin is really kind of my go-to favorite. I really do think he has what it takes, and I think he'd be a really, really fun winner. Paul may be on a downslope in the near future, but we have seen these time and time again where we do have these returning seasons where the returning players do really, really well. And I do think that Paul has probably the biggest advantage right now. So I would say that he's still really, really, really high up there. Beyond them, like what is the next tier? Possibly we outlined a tier for a way for Jessica to get to the end and possibly earn some votes to win. I'm kind of drawing up a blank after that, really.
I'm throwing in Elena. I really think she's
I think Elena's probably next up there.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think if there's anybody else that I would add to the list. I mean, maybe if Matt is able to get far enough along and then decides to start playing, I think that it has the social game to win. I think he would be able to do well enough in the competitions to win. So it's just a matter of whether or not he actually decides to play the game.
All right. Lita from Chi-Town Patty on Twitter. Is there any chance for Jody to build an alliance that could get them deeper in the game? Do they have any shot as a couple here to actually reintegrate themselves?
Yes, I have said this before. I think there's a chance. I'm not saying it'll happen. I think that there is a chance after this blindside for them to realize that they need to link up with Mark and Elena. And I think that there are flips that can happen once those two couples are together that can form a solid alliance to go deeper in the game. I just think that they're not going to be able to get out of each other's butts long enough to figure that out for themselves. But I really think that there is an opportunity there for them.
Okay.
Oh my.
Jon, question from Survivor Reacts on Twitter. If Raven and a box of cereal are on the block together down the road, which do you think Matt will evict?
Oh my God, I can see the scene now, like the way that Big Brother's editing it. There's like this suspenseful music, there's close-ups, like his eyes are darting left and right, like beads of sweat are coming down. I don't know. I think that a box of cereal has never, ever, ever in his entire life steered Matt wrong.
What kind of cereal? Depends.
I
I don't know. What does he
specified.
eat most often?
Oh my gosh.
I don't know.
I just the diary room session too. He's like, well, Raven's been always supportive of me in this house and stood by me, but cereal, my true love.
Raven's not part of a complete breakfast.
I was talking to Kevin and he was expressing the importance of having food made for you. And you know, the great thing about
Having
cereal
breakfast.
is that nobody has to make it for you. You just have to pour some things into a bowl. It's just all it takes. So I'm sorry, Raven, but I have to go with cereal.
Raven's not the most important meal of the day.
Considering that Matt is pretty much an inanimate object himself, I wouldn't be surprised that he would want to keep cereal over Raven.
I've been loving people who've been taking screenshots of the live feeds and uploading them and being like, Matt on the couch, and it's just no one there. It's like part of part of my feed of just like Big Brother updates. And sometimes there's actual pictures, but it's like Matt in the backyard. It's just a picture. It's just a blank picture.
All right, last question from Jake. If Dominique were still in the game, could you see her working with Jessica and Cody? Liana, what do you think?
I mean, I think that would be a situation where Dominique would have to, swallow her pride and be able to maybe form some sentences where she actually is willing to say people's names in order to talk to them. The lies and deceit might be too strong and Dominique might not be willing. I mean, it's just so hard when you watch her isolate herself essentially for an entire week to try and get her back in the headspace where she might want to work with them. But I think, seeing both Cody and Dominique sit next to each other on the battle backstage, you could tell that there was conversation that was already happening. And I think that because both had been betrayed, I mean, I don't know in this circumstance how they would both be in the house. There could be this sort of shared experience that could force them to work together.
Well, can you just imagine? Can you imagine Dominique going up to Cody and being like, "Listen, so there's this snake in the house. There's somebody," and she's just telling him riddles, and he's just like, What are you talking about?
I hear the riddles.
No,
I don't
like-
care.
Yeah.
I saw the
I'm
snake. I
Trevor
didn't
Reynolds.
care. I saw that. By the end of the week last week, Dominique and Jessica were on very, very, very good terms. And it wasn't clear because we lost feeds for so long. But when they came on, Jessica, we now know retroactively had the power. And I do think that there was some indication that she may have told Dominique a little bit about what she was tempted with, because they were talking a lot about like, oh, next week when, we're still here or whatever. Like Dominique, I think really was on good terms with Jessica when she left the house. If she had won the battle back or if Jessica had used the halting axe this week and saved both of them,
Maybe
I think they would have worked.
Maybe Jessica can somehow operate as the translator for both Dominique and Cody, so she can go back and forth. So maybe they can actually understand each other.
Dominique was just talking to me about like basketball, and all I could think about was how I could totally snipe a basketball out of the air at 500 yards. And man, it just yeah.
It's never easy to witness a false fact. Never easy to dribble the ball back. Oh, genius.
All right, that's it for our beta team breakfast club roundtable for tonight. This was a great show. I really enjoyed you guys.
Thanks, Karen. We enjoyed you too.
I'm indifferent.
Thank you. I knew you would be, Jon. This is why you lost Sequester.
More.
Too soon.
Harsh.
I'm sorry, you should have won. All right. Does anybody have any good ideas for a hashtag? I do like Breakfast Club, but there are, I'm sure, plenty out there.
Not meatball train?
And make
Meatball
train.
sub.
There's lots of them.
like
Let me know what you
breakfast
like in the chat.
I like
Marvin strategy.
Breakfast Club is fun.
What'd you say?
I'm a fan of Breakfast Club. We could combine Breakfast Club and Meatball Sub and have it be Breakfast Sub.
yeah. Breakfast sub
Or
All right.
Meatball Club.
Meatball Club. I would actually try one of those. That sounds good.
All right. Make sure you check out the Taran Show. A new episode will be dropping tomorrow. I talked with Brent all about his experiences as an escort, his involvement in the Michael Peterson trial. Lots of interesting stuff in that interview, so make sure you check it out. It will be out tomorrow. Very, very fun stuff. Well, I don't know if you'd say it fun, but it's definitely interesting. Make sure you also check out our live feed update tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. Eastern. We will also be live on the Wednesday, after the Wednesday episode, to talk about the veto, and we will be talking with Alex Willett on that Wednesday night episode. And then on Thursday, as I mentioned, we will be talking with April Lewis. So got a good round of guests coming up for you. And we will have Karen back. Her power will be back eventually. So we will get Karen on the podcast someday soon, hopefully. So keep on the lookout for that. Also, make sure you check out the Big Brother live show we have in New York. I believe there are a few tickets left, but it's almost sold out, I think, at this point. So make sure you check that out if you're interested in coming. It's going to be very, very fun. And also, Lita, talk to me about American Ninja Warrior.
No, why are you making me do it? You never plug it anymore. Now that you have the Taran Show.
Let's not plug it then. Let's just move on.
Okay, if you like the Taran Show, you'll love the Taran and Lita Show, aka American Ninja Warrior wrap-up. We'll be recording that sometime. It seems like Taran has no time this week, so we'll see. It'll come out later this week. We have some guests lined up, I believe. And So You Think You Can Dance is also happening. That wrap-up will be out later this week with Kelly Bedard.
All right. And also make sure you check out But First, a Big Brother 2 blockumentary. Always fun. So are we going to go with, what was it, breakfast or what was it?
I like Meatball Club. New favorite, Meatball Club.
All right. We'll go with hashtag Meatball Club. You can find us on Twitter. I'm at Armstrong Taran. Lita is at Lita Tweeted. Liana, you are at...
At Liana Boraas. It's very complicated.
Yes.
LIANABORAAS.
And Jon?
I'm at Jon Krause. That's just my name too.
All right. So make sure you follow everyone on Twitter. For Lita, Jon, and Liana, I am Taran Armstrong. Hashtag Meatball Club. We will see you next time.